IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Want to just begin, folks, by apologizing for being late, but got a little something going on in my family. My wife is having a rough time right now. She just found out, she just got a call from her dad that her grandma's getting ready to pass away. So needed to spend some time with my wife here. So I do apologize, and she apologizes. She told me to let everyone know that she's sorry for causing us to be late, but that was the reason that we were later than normal today. So I do apologize to everyone, but we are ready to rock and roll. We're going to keep on keeping on, and we got some fun stuff to talk about today. Going to dive into. I told you all last week we were gonna get into the Notre Dame in the magazines, right? We talked about that, and so we're gonna dive into that today. So I've got the Phil Steele, Lindy's, and Athlon. So I'm going to kind of go over where Notre Dame is ranked, what some things I see from where people are ranked and how people evaluate Notre Dame. Going to dive into that. Going to talk about the All-American list for each group because there's some constants and some that are very different. So we'll dive into that, have a little bit of fun with that, and then I'm going to go through sort of the position breakdowns that they have. So they rank the quarterbacks or backfields, receivers, lines, D-line, linebacker, DBs, and dive into how the different magazines see those. And then I'll give, my opinion of where I think Notre Dame about should be and what I like and don't like. And we'll have some fun with that. So that's meant to be a fun topic. And then topic number 2, I'm going to talk about the veteran players that have to step up for Notre Dame this year. And when I look at the past teams in Notre Dame, I've said often that a lot of times when you see teams that have success, a lot of times it comes down to, you've got different aspects of it, right? You've got young guys that step up. You think of the 88 team, and you think of guys like Rocket Ismail and Derek Brown, who are freshmen, and Ricky Waters, who was a sophomore, and just, Arnold Ali was a freshman on that team. There's a lot of young players on the team that had an impact. And then you had, veteran stars, and you had breakout players. And then, that team also had some veterans that maybe weren't, impact players before, didn't do a whole lot before, that then step into key roles and play well. And when you look at sort of I went back to 2018 and looked forward. And when you look at some of the better teams on Notre Dame's schedule, the more veterans that really raise their level, the better those teams have been. And I'll break that down as well. So that'll be part 2 of the show. And then part 3, hopefully, will be a film room. As you all know, sometimes StreamYard just likes to not be friendly. And today we're having a little bit of an issue with StreamYard, allowing us to bring up the film of some of the recruits. But as long as I can figure that out, and I think I have figured that out, I will do a film room. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the recruits that are on campus this week. There are 3 big recruits on campus this week right now, starting today through Thursday. So I'll talk about those midweek of players, and then we'll watch a little film of 2 of those guys. We're not going to watch film on Jadon Blair because we've watched a lot of film on Jadon Blair, and you guys know that I think Jadon Blair's a stud, and so we'll talk about, where things stand with Jadon and how important of a recruit he has always been, and even more so now. And we will talk about that before we dive into the film room. So we'll talk a little bit of recruiting and go from there. So as always, no more mailbags in the middle of the week. So if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to be brought up in the show, please feel free to go ahead and leave a super chat. Otherwise, you can hold your topics until Friday for our big mailbag on Friday. Or you could also just go to the message board, and obviously at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can bring up any question you want, and we'll engage in whatever you want to talk about. So lots going on, lots to get to. It's going to be a fun week. Lots of cool shows planned this week, and then next week we should start getting more shows where it won't just be me. It'll be Vince and I. But obviously we are rocking and rolling because it's June 11th, and before you know it, it's going to be July, and before you know it, we're going to be talking about Notre Dame's reporting to fall camp, and before you know it, August 31st is going to be here. So it's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of great stuff to talk about, and I'm looking forward to all of it. So we're going to get rocking and rolling here first by looking at Notre Dame in the magazines. So obviously there's a lot of different preseason rankings, and there's some online rankings, and then there's the magazine rankings, and you're seeing Notre Dame kind of anywhere between like 5th and 10th is what I've seen. And I think that's relatively fair. I have a tougher time personally placing Notre Dame as low as 10, but I totally get it. It's not one of those things where even if you have them 10, like I believe Athlon Sports just did a post-spring top 10 and they dropped top 25 and they dropped Notre Dame from 9 to 10. Like, okay, I don't agree with that, but it's there's just so much similarity to me once you get through after the top three that I really have no pushback. So I'll kind of go over where I have Notre Dame here in a little bit. But when you look at it, there's just kind of that range from 5 to 10. 6 to 8 is a little bit more common. There's a couple that have them 9 and 10, but I think ESPN has Notre Dame highest at 5. Athlon dropping them to 10 is the lowest, and that's sort of the range that I've seen from all the preseason magazines. Now that we're out of spring and we kind of have an idea of who left in the portal, who arrived in the portal, and people have got a chance to see those players. So when you look at the preseason top 25, I'll just kind of go through what I see in the preseason magazines because I always get those. I mean, those have been something I've been reading for years and to varying levels of intrigue. Obviously, from year to year, it can change and from team to team. But when you look at the preseason magazines this year, as I said, I have Phil Steele, I have Athlon, and I have Lindy Sports. Athlon, I definitely would encourage all of you to buy selfishly because I wrote the Notre Dame section in that. And so that was one of those bucket list items that was kind of checked off that I'm hoping that I'll be able to get to continue moving forward. But their rankings, I was not part of the rankings process. I just wrote the Notre Dame section. But when you look at the preseason top 25s, Phil Steele has Notre Dame highest with 6. This is a very interesting ranking, which I'll get into first. I could not find anyway, him having a postseason college football playoff projection. I couldn't find it. But if you look at his ranking and then he had Notre Dame 6th, my guess would be based on how he has it, that he would have Notre Dame as an 8 seed playing Bama, who was the 9 seed. And now Notre Dame was 6th, Bama was 7th. But all the teams ahead of Notre Dame were either Big Ten or SEC teams. And so you had to have the winner of those two, which I believe was Ohio State, Georgia, 1 and 2. Then the 3 seed would have been, I believe, Florida State, I believe was his highest ACC team. I actually have it right here. I can kind of go look at it while we're talking. But I believe Florida State was his top ACC team, highest ranked ACC team. And then, of course, you'd have the next highest conference champion, which would either be a Big 12 team or a Group of 5 team, whoever that number 4 team would be. And I believe it was a Big 12 team. I believe Utah, if I'm correct, I'm going through here and pulling up his top 25 again. I believe Utah was the next highest team on his, because Phil Steele does a power ranking and a top 25. His power ranking is based on how he views teams. His top 25, so he has a power poll. He had Notre Dame 8th on his power poll, which I thought I usually like Phil Steele, but his power poll this year I thought was really off. He had Miami 10. He had Oklahoma ahead of Notre Dame, Penn State all the way up at 5. It was a very interesting ranking, but that's more off just what he thinks of the quality of the teams. Then he has a top 25 that is his predicted finish, how teams are going to finish. So not a preseason ranking, but a finish ranking. So he had Notre Dame number 6, Bama right behind them. Utah he had at 8, so I was correct on that. And then it actually was Miami is his highest ranked ACC team. So he would have had, if you look at that and you look at how those would go, based on his ranking, it would be Georgia's the 1 seed, Ohio State as the 2 seed, Utah as the 3 seed, and then Miami is the 4 seed. So then you'd have Oregon as the 5, Texas as the 6, Penn State as the 7, and then Notre Dame 8, Bama 9. You'd have Michigan 10, Iowa 11, and then you'd have, I'm trying to find who his highest Group of 5 team would be in his ranking. And let me go down here real quick. It would be Boise State at number 16, looks like would be the highest ranked team. So Notre Dame at that point in time would be an 8 seed playing Bama, who would be the 9 seed. And if they win, they'd get Georgia number 1. If you look at the Lindy's top 25, they had Notre Dame number 8. They also had Notre Dame as a 10 seed playing Ole Miss, who would have been the 7 seed. And then the winner of that game would play number 2 Ohio State. Athlon has Notre Dame ranked 9th in their preseason magazine. And they have Notre Dame as an 11 seed playing number 6 seed Texas. And then the winner of that would play 3 seed Florida State in the next round, whoever would win that game. So that's sort of the preseason magazines, how they have Notre Dame. Most of those are fair. I think what these magazines are showing people, I've seen people say, like, how can you have Notre Dame ranked 8th, but then a 10 seed? Or how can you have Notre Dame 6th and have them as an 8 seed? Because if only 2 leagues are ranked ahead of Notre Dame, if Notre Dame is the number 3 team in the country, then they're guaranteed at least a 5 seed. If they're the number 4 team in the country, there's a chance they get the 5 seed. But if the teams ahead of them as the number 4 team are from 2 conferences, so SEC and Big Ten, then you would have the ACC and Big 12 champs most likely go ahead of Notre Dame. So you'd have the 1, 2, then the two conference champs would be 3 and 4. Then you'd have the 3 and the 4 teams would then rank ahead of Notre, or the number 3 team would rank ahead of Notre Dame, so Notre Dame would fall down to 6, and it works like that. So I mean, there's a scenario where, you know, if Notre Dame is as low as the 6th seed, there's a scenario in which they could fall out of the top 8 and have a home game. It's unlikely, but it could happen. But if Notre Dame wants to be a team that hosts a playoff game, if they're the 7 seed, they better hope that there's an ACC or a Big 12 or a Group of 5 team ahead of them, or at least one. And otherwise, you're going to have those leagues all leap them. And next thing you know, Notre Dame goes from a 7 to a 9 or a 7 to a 10. And so that's why it's imperative that Notre Dame not just have a top 8 ranking. There's a lot of talk about, as long as you get a top 8 ranking, you'll be a home team. No, that's not necessarily true. There's a difference between the seeding and the ranking. And so unless you have 4 conference champs ranked ahead of you, then you just slot them basically as is. You're most likely going to get pushed down. So it's really important for Notre Dame to be a team that goes out there and handles business. Now, like last year, for example, you know, if you would have had, let's say Florida State doesn't lose Jordan Travis, would have been a little bit different last year, because you would have had 4 teams in the top 4 that were from different leagues. And so Notre Dame, if they were a 5 seed, would have been a 5 seed, you know, because they would have, you know, stayed ahead, would have gone ahead of Georgia when Georgia lost to Bama, most likely. You had Washington from the Pac-12, Texas from the Big 12, and Florida State from, or, you know, Michigan from the Big 10. So you would have had, you know, 4 of those 5, and then you would have had, you know, your ACC champ would have been Florida State. So there's a chance that if, like, Notre Dame was the 5 seed last year going in, again, let's say they're 11-1, 12-0, they're ranked as the 5 seed, they would have been able to stay there, because you would have had, you know, 4 top, you had 5 conference, the 4 of the conference champions were all ranked in the top 4 to 5. So they would have been in a position to do that. So, but there's going to be other years where they could be a 4 seed and fall all the way to 6, or maybe even 7, depending on, you know, if there's the teams ahead of them are all from one conference, which again is unlikely, but possible. So that's where they are on the rankings. When you look at, I have Notre Dame 5th in my preseason ranking right now. And just because I look at Notre Dame and they have flaws, they have things to prove. But I think that's true of a lot of teams that are ahead of Notre Dame, that other people have ahead of Notre Dame. You know, I look at Oregon as a team that's got some question marks and some flaws. There's a lot of people just assuming that Oregon's going to be able to replace Bo Nix no problem, and replace, you know, Bucky Irving and some of the other guys they lost no problem. And I get it, because Dan Lanning's had more success so far than Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. There's a lot of assumptions about how Texas is just going to keep rolling, and they may very well do that. They obviously have a lot of talent coming back. Steve Sarkisian did a great job last year, but I think that's another team that has a lot to prove. Ole Miss, talented team, still a lot to prove. Alabama, talented team, still a lot to prove. So I think there's a lot of teams that have things to prove, because you did lose a lot of players from certain teams. You did lose a Hall of Fame coach from another team. And now, while I think Alabama is going to be fine, I've talked about this. I actually have Alabama as my preseason number 4, just so you know. My top 5 is Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, Texas 3, Alabama 4, Notre Dame 5. So that's where I'm at. Totally fine. I saw somebody, I think Matt Boer in the chat, I believe, said Notre Dame should be 7. Totally fine with that. I've had other people in the chat in past, when we've talked about the ranking, have said, you know, 9 to 10. Totally fine with that too. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of room. To me, there's not a locked in, this is how it should go outside the top three. I think you could make a case for Bama being higher than most people. I think you can make a case for Oregon being up there high. I think you can make a case for Penn State being a little bit higher. I'm less, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm less sympathetic to the Penn State thought process of being up there, but I've seen people make it, and I understand it. I wouldn't agree with it, but I understand it. And obviously Ole Miss we've talked about as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how the first top 25 comes out, but all of this is going to get shaked out by the time we get to November anyway, because you're going to have a lot of these teams are going to have to play each other. And so we're going to get an idea. So anywhere from 5 to 10, I'm comfortable with. I have Notre Dame number 5 for the reasons I talked about. I love the talent of this football team. I think they have depth. I think they have impact players at very important positions, including quarterback. So there's a lot of things I like. But when I read through the preseason magazines, you start to see some themes as to why Notre Dame is where they are. And a lot of these magazines like their defense a lot. Some of them have bigger question marks about Notre Dame's defensive groups than maybe others, which would explain a bit about their ranking. But the big question mark, the one that they all have, is the offense. There's obviously a lot of people say, hey, there's a lot of questions about the offense. How is Riley Leonard going to bounce back? There's a lot of people that don't think Riley Leonard's as good as I do. And I don't even mean that negatively. I mean, they may have him as the 11th or 12th best quarterback in the country, where I think he's more of a borderline top 5 kind of guy. We'll see if that's the case or not. We got to see if he can bounce back and all those type of things. But when you look at it, you realize that the offense is in a situation where there's a lot of skepticism, a lot of show me is needed from the offense, which I think is completely fair. I mean, if we're being honest and objective as Notre Dame fans, people want to see the offense play well in big games, and using that as their justification for knocking down Notre Dame in the rankings, I don't know how we can push back on that, because that's been a problem for a number of years. It's not like they've been good in those moments for years and then they had a down year or two. This has been a problem for over a decade, where the offense just doesn't step up and play well in the biggest moments. And until that changes, Notre Dame is going to continue to be a team that people look at and with some question marks. There's another thing that I noticed in the schedule as well. I don't think a lot of these people that have Notre Dame ranked where they rank them do that because they think Notre Dame is the 6th best team. When we know Phil Steele doesn't. He had him 8th on his power poll. Well, why does he have him 6? Yeah, Lindy's has some question marks about Notre Dame. Athlon certainly has some question marks about Notre Dame. So why do they have them ranked where they have them? Well, a lot of it is because the concerns that people have with Notre Dame is that I talked about offense. They don't view Notre Dame as being a team that's going to reload the way that other top teams do. There's more skepticism about how they're going to replace departed players than others do, which is a lot of where I think a lot of the skepticism comes from. But even within that skepticism, they're still ranked pretty high, because I believe a lot of them look at Notre Dame's schedule as very soft. And we're going to dive into Notre Dame's schedule next week. Once I get Vince on the show, we're going to have segments, not every day, but a lot of days, where we're going to break down the schedule, or we're going to look at opponents, and we're going to start doing that here next week. And we're going to carry that through the end of the summer until we get into fall camp, and even some stuff into fall camp. We'll have some stuff kind of leading up to the season. But you look at the schedule makers, and they think Notre Dame's schedule is pretty soft this year. I don't think their schedule is as soft as people make it out to be. I don't think their schedule's hard. I've said this. I don't think it's a murderer's row schedule. I don't think it's a situation where, oh my gosh, I don't know how they're going to make it through unscathed with the schedule they have. But like Phil Steele had Notre Dame's schedule 57th, and that I don't see. I think that when I look at this Notre Dame schedule, there's a big drop off expected from some teams that Notre Dame plays that I don't think is going to happen. When you look at Notre Dame's schedule and you look at how their schedule is viewed, there's a lot of doubters about some of the teams in the schedule. But you just look at the Phil Steele ranking, and he has his power poll. He has Notre Dame's schedule 57th. He has Notre Dame 8th in his power poll. When you look at his rankings, the highest ranked, I mean, here's why I kind of look at these things and say, I question why you guys are so down on the schedule. Because if you look at Phil Steele's power poll, he has Texas A&M 15th. He has Louisville 23rd, USC 24th, Florida State 14th. So it's actually Florida State 14, A&M 15, Louisville 23rd, USC 24. And then you look at the rest of the schedule and you see, in his view, there's a bit of a drop off after that. But you have Georgia Tech at 44. And then you get down to the rest of the schedule. Obviously, they don't think overly high of. But my thing is, how do you have a team as ranking 57th in strength of schedule when you have 4 top 25 teams on your schedule? And 2 of those top 25 games are on the road. And so I find it interesting. You'll see some of these rankings that view Notre Dame's schedule a certain way, and you're like, boy, I'm not quite sure you're making this argument, but your ranking tells us a different story. And I think Phil Steele's is an example of that. But I think if you were to say, well, why is that the case? If you were to dive into the numbers, it would most likely be because they see a big drop off after the top 4. So as I mentioned, you've got USC 24th. The next Notre Dame opponent is Georgia Tech at 44. After that, you have to go all the way down to Purdue at 63, Virginia at 65. You would then have, there's another drop off, Miami of Ohio 74, Stanford 78 is another one of Notre Dame's opponents. So you kind of see that drop off after the top 4 teams. So that's the thing I've noticed is they're kind of praising Notre Dame for, yes, they're a good football team. They have some holes, some flaws. We like other teams better talent-wise, but their schedule is going to boost them up. And I just found that argument a little bit interesting, which I think you could make that case if you're not like, there's a lot of people down on Florida State. There's a lot of people that don't think Louisville's going to be as good as they were last year. There's a lot of people that don't think A&M is going to be as good as some people think that they're going to be. And that's all fair. That's fine. But when I look at the way that they rank these teams, it's kind of like, well, but if you don't think highly of that schedule, then why do you have Notre Dame's opponents ranked there? So that's been more of my pushback on that. Is I think that there's where I think people are missing the boat on Notre Dame is I actually think the offensive concerns are legitimate. Notre Dame's going to have a very inexperienced offensive line, and we all know Phil Steele puts a ton of value on experience. And that's one position where I think experience matters, and we've talked about this. So that's a concern, and we've talked about why I'm not as concerned about it as I might be in other seasons, but it's a concern. When I look at the other aspects of it, this is where I think they're missing the boat. I think they're missing the boat from the impression I get is they don't think Notre Dame is going to reload the way that they just assume other teams will. Like, for example, Texas. There's this assumption that Texas is just going to reload. And yes, they lost Xavier Worthy. They lost A.D. Thomas. They lost Jatavian Sanders. They lost Jonathan Brooks. They lost their 2 starting defensive tackles. And boom, they're just going to reload. And my answer is, why do you assume that? What has Texas done to earn that reputation that Notre Dame doesn't? The last 2 years, even with a playoff berth and a conference championship game, Texas in the last 2 years has won 20 games. Notre Dame has won 19. So I don't quite understand why there's this assumption that Texas is just going to reload and keep rolling. Oregon, they're just going to reload and keep rolling. Well, based on what? Now, I think that they're still going to be very good, but what has Dan Lanning shown in 2 years? Because he's had the same quarterback in 2 years. He's had a lot of the same players in 2 years. So this is going to be the first time he's had some really key, crucial losses at positions where he's going to have to replace some big-time players. So I think there's a little inconsistency here where Notre Dame doesn't get the benefit of the doubt of reloading, even though I think you could argue that last year's team reloaded extremely well, whereas other people just kind of just assume that Texas is going to reload, for example, or Oregon's going to reload, and Penn State's going to reload, and Oklahoma's going to reload. The Phil Steele having Oklahoma 7th in his power poll is one of the biggest head scratchers for me. And he's pretty good at what he does, but that's one I'm going to have to keep my eye on because I just do not see it with Oklahoma in a lot of ways. But when you look at Notre Dame, like last year, for example, they lost. They were coming off a year where they had to replace Michael Mayer on offense. They had to replace Jarrett Patterson on offense. They had to replace Logan Diggs on offense. They had to replace Braden Lindsey on offense. They had to replace Isaiah Foskey on defense, Jason Adamiola on defense, Justin Adamiola on defense, Tariq Bracy at nickel. Those were some very important players to their 2022 success. And Notre Dame was a much better team in 2023 than they were in 22. I think the one thing that Notre Dame has done under Mark Freeman is show that, hey, we can reload from position losses. Now, they haven't shown that they can be good enough at certain positions, but they certainly showed that, hey, we can reload here. We can lose a Logan Diggs and be even better at running back. We can lose, certain players like Tariq Bracy and go out in the portal and get a guy that's every bit as good as he was, maybe even a touch better. We can lose Isaiah Foskey and the Adamiola twins and have an even better defensive line. They proved that they can do that, in my opinion. Lost Brandon Joseph from the year before. Safety play got even better. So I think this Notre Dame team showed last year that they can reload. There are questions about, can they win the big one? Very fair. Can the offense play at elite level against the bigger teams? Very fair. And we'll spend all summer talking about those two topics at different times. But I believe that this Notre Dame team has shown that they can reload, and I don't believe that they should be getting the same sort of dismissal in that regard as maybe other teams who they're just assuming is going to play better. So that was kind of my take on where Notre Dame is in the top 25 in the playoff rankings. I'm not super off on that. Just some observations on that. I didn't read anything in the magazines where I was like, this is nonsense. Like, this is just the stupidest thing ever. I can't believe they're saying this. I didn't really see anything like that. Some things I disagree with, like I don't have certain position groups I think should be ranked higher, but I understand why. And we'll dive into those in a little bit as we move forward on this. Next, I want to talk about the All-Americans on the board, if you look at the magazine. So I'm going to go through each magazine and talk about their All-Americans because there were some very interesting ones. I'm going to start off with Athlon. Athlon had Howard Cross as a first-team All-American. He was the only position player to be a first-team All-American. Now, Athlon also had Jaden Harrison as a first-team All-American preseason as a kick returner. But of the 11 position players, it was only Howard Cross. The second team, you had two secondary players on the second team. You had Xavier Watson, Benjamin Morrison were both on the second team for Notre Dame. And then Athlon's third team had Mitchell Evans as a third-team player at tight end. Lindy's had Howard Cross and Xavier Watts as first-team All-Americans, and then Mitchell Evans and Benjamin Morrison as second-team players. They did not have, from what I remember, kick returners listed amongst their All-American teams. Then Phil Steele had a very interesting All-American squad. And some of it wasn't, overly surprising. He had Howard Cross as a first-team All-American. Everybody does. He has Xavier Watts as a first-team All-American. He's either first or second with everybody. He had Jaden Harrison as a first-team kick returner. Fine. Mitchell Evans is a second-team tight end. Fine. Third team, I'm looking through. Okay, nope, no Notre Dame guys. And then he has a fourth-team All-American list. And I went through it and was like, nope, but no Benjamin Morrison. I don't know if he's incorporating the injury into this. Perhaps he could be, but I was shocked that there was no Benjamin Morrison on the All-American squad. Like, look, you could argue he's not a first teamer. You could even argue that he's not a second teamer. I wouldn't accept it, but I would. Let me rephrase. I would not agree with it, but I would accept the argument because it is a very good year at cornerback. But to have four teams means 8 players, and so you're saying you don't think Benjamin Morrison is going to be one of the 8 best corners in college football this year, was a giant head scratcher. It was not as bad as the year you had Quentin Nelson as like the 20th guard in the draft, right? But that one was, to me, was a big, big miss in my opinion. So All-Americans, obviously Howard Cross, first team across the board. Xavier Watts, 2 first teams, 1 second team. Mitchell Evans, 2 second teams and a third team. And then Jaden Harrison had 2 first teams as kicker. Matter of fact, actually the only two magazines that had a preseason All-American kick returner both had Jaden Harrison there, which is ironic because Jaden Harrison's kick return average last year wasn't even as good as the guy that Notre Dame had. So, but I understand why Jaden Harrison is going to be there, and hopefully he actually does take over the kick return role this year from Jadarian Price, because I want Jadarian focusing all his time on running back. So that's the All-American squad in the magazines. Let's get into the positional rankings and how these different outlets rank the teams by position. Now, Athlon and Lindy's just do a top 10, and Phil Steele does, I think his is a top 50. So let me actually go down here to his position rankings because I think he ranks like 50 position groups. So at a time, just actually looks like I passed it here. Let me scroll up. The ordering of his magazine is very odd. I know some people swear by this man. He actually does a top 70. I know some people swear at most positions in top 60 something at others. I know people love his magazine. It's fine. It's there's a lot in. I mean, for me to say this, it's a lot. It's unnecessarily wordy, which some of you might find to be ironic coming from me because I think a lot of people say I'm unnecessarily wordy, but it is what it is. But he does 60 to 70 in each one. So Lindy's Lindy's did a quarterback ranking. So they went quarterback, running back, wide receiver, O line, D line, linebacker, secondary. Athlon did backfields, receivers, O line, D line, linebacker, secondary, and then Phil Steele goes position by position as well. So when you look at Lindy's, they actually had the most preseason respect for Notre Dame from a position group standpoint, at least from the top 10. They had 4 different Notre Dame units in the top 10, which is the most. Phil Steele had 3, and Athlon only had 2, which I found understandable because the difference is Lindy's and Phil Steele both did quarterbacks, then running backs. Athlon did backfield. And so obviously with Notre Dame losing a lot and not having a big rusher coming back like they did last year, I think has knocked them down a little bit. But when and I would imagine that with Phil Steele having Notre Dame 8th at quarterback and 17th and at running back, there's a chance he may not have had the backfield in the top 10. So let's look at Lindy's first. On offense, there was only one group in the top 10 for Lindy's. That's the quarterback position, which they had 7th. I think that's a fair ranking. I'd probably have them higher, but I think that's a very fair ranking based on talent, returning talent. If Riley Leonard wasn't hurt, I do believe that Notre Dame's quarterback room would be ranked higher. I do. I really do. When you look at the running back room, they were not in the top 10. Receivers were not in the top 10. Offensive line was not in the top 10. When you look at Phil Steele's, I'm going to go talk about the offense first and go to the defense. Phil Steele had 2 Notre Dame groups in the top 10. He had the quarterbacks number 8, which again is fair. Anything in the top 10 for the Notre Dame quarterbacks is fine because you have a very talented starter coming back who's coming off of an injury where he basically missed half the year, and everything after him is pretty unproven. And you could argue your next best quarterback talent-wise is a true freshman. So I'm fine with that. I'm fine with anything in the top 10. I would probably rank them higher, but I'm comfortable with where they are. When you look at they have the running back group ranked 17th. I would have Notre Dame's running back room ranked a lot higher because when you look at the returning production, they do have over 1,000 yards of offense coming back next year. I think people miss that. I think when people evaluate Notre Dame, they just see Audric and they see his success. But Jadarian and Jeremiah combined for over 600 rushing yards last year and had over 200 receiving yards between them. And then you add in Jabron Payne's production and Devin Ford's production, you're over 1,000 yards. Now, obviously now Jabron's going to be out. This magazine came out before Jabron was out though. But, and then you've got the 2 talented freshmen coming in. So I think 17 is too low. I think Notre Dame's running back room should be considered a top 10 group. I do. And I think that there's teams that have better individual running backs, or I should say more established running backs than what Notre Dame has. But there's not a lot of groups that I'm going to look at and say, hey, I'm taking that group over Notre Dame's, right? I don't see that. Like they have Minnesota ahead of Notre Dame. They have Minnesota at 6. Miami, Florida, I understand because they got Damian Martinez in. You got Cal with Jade Knott. Again, love Jade Knott. Jade Knott's a more proven player than anybody Notre Dame has. This is supposed to be about the backfield as a whole, though. And I don't know that I would put them over Notre Dame's. I wouldn't put Texas A&M's group over Notre Dame's. I wouldn't put UCF, Ole Miss, Boise. Boise State's got a really good running back. Not a lot after that. SMU. Like, would any of you trade SMU's backfield for Notre Dame's? Would you trade Boise's, Ole Miss, UCF, Texas A&M, Cal? if we're talking about the entire back, they have Liberty 4. They have North Carolina 5, which, again, Morgan Hampton's a really good running back. They've got good depth there, but I still like Notre Dame's group better. But I understand them being a little bit lower, but 17 is, to me, a little bit too low. They have Notre Dame's offensive line group ranked 26. This is their lowest ranking for any position group for Notre Dame. If you know Notre Dame, if you know Phil Steele, he puts a ton of value in experience at certain positions. And offensive line is certainly one of those position groups where he puts a lot of value on experience. And Notre Dame doesn't have a lot. We've talked about that. Your starting tackles, right now, your projected 2 starting tackles have a grand total of 4 career starts. In that one of the guy that has 3 of those 4 starts might get beat out in fall camp. We don't even know for sure that he's going to start. You've got 2 guards with 10 or more career starts, but they're now playing the same position. And one of them was replaced by a guy, whoever doesn't start, was replaced by a guy with only 3 career starts. And your center went from a 20-plus game starter in Zeke Correll to a guy in Ashton Craig who has 3 career starts. So there's not – we broke this down, I think last week, I believe. Not a lot of starts coming back. Understand that. I still think 26 is way too low when you consider that Notre Dame's talent is what it is. And then also when you consider that they have a group that we've seen play together. That's the thing that I often – it's like, do people like acknowledge that when they talk about Notre Dame's offensive line, when they have their offensive line? Like, some of the offensive lines ahead of them I get, but like, they have Ohio State's offensive line ahead of Notre Dame's. I don't care how many guys Notre Dame's offensive line lost. They were a significantly better offensive line than than Ohio State was last year. You've got Cincinnati's offensive line ranked ahead of them. They were a solid offensive line last year, but I am not ranking them ahead of Notre Dame. So you got Georgia, Texas, number 10. So when I look at this, I just say, boy, that is like, they have A&M's ahead of Notre Dame. They have Minnesota's ahead of Notre Dame. One of Minnesota's better offensive linemen is a guy that couldn't even get on the field of Notre Dame. Kind of like, but couldn't get on the field of Notre Dame. So when I look at where they have Notre Dame's offensive line, that's a big head scratcher for me. Totally fine with them being outside of the top 10. I'd probably have them borderline top 10 right now, but I can understand you want to have them 15 to 16, 17. Totally get that because lack of experience. But you're talking about your offensive line has like 3 guys that were ranked in the top 100 because he puts value on recruiting and where guys were ranked. You've got guys that have size. You've got talent. Your weakest position could arguably the one where you have the most experience. And you've got, like I said, a group that played together. And I feel like that completely gets ignored in a lot of these conversations about the offensive line. Is we saw the Notre Dame offensive line play together in a game where they went out and ran for over 200 yards, had over 460 yards of offense, scored 38 offensive points, and had a lot of production. So I just look at it and I just kind of scratch my head about having it that low. Like, you think there's 25 teams in college football that are going to have a better offensive line than Notre Dame this year? That I find a little bit surprising. But that also factors into why you would imagine that Phil Steele doesn't think Notre Dame's going to be quite as good as maybe we think they will, and why he's putting so much into their higher ranking being schedule related. And then again, he's not totally down on Notre Dame, because on the flip side, while I think he's undervaluing Notre Dame's offensive line, he does seem to like Notre Dame's wide receiver room. He has Notre Dame's wide receiver room ranked 10th. And he talks about how Notre Dame brought back 4 of their top 6 receivers. And then he also talks about adding Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins. Plus they add in 2 true freshmen that are talented, referring to Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert. So he's actually higher on Notre Dame's receiver room. And if you look at Notre Dame's schedule, only 2 Notre Dame opponents have a higher ranked receiver room than Notre Dame's. You have Louisville at 9 and USC at 5. So that I found that to be very, very interesting when looking at that. So he's a lot higher on the receiver room, which again has a lot of experience. He values experience. Now, it's not a lot of experience at Notre Dame, but it's a lot of experience. And I've talked about this. You're talking about a receiver room that's got over 3,000 career yards coming back next year. There's a lot of proven players to a degree, and then some players who've played a lot of snaps. So I was actually surprised. I've seen a lot of receiver rooms. A lot of the rankings have Miami ranked ahead of Notre Dame, LSU ranked ahead of Notre Dame. Phil Steele does not. He has Notre Dame ranked ahead of both of those units. So he has them at number 10 this season coming back. So I thought that was a pretty high ranking. Nobody else has the receiver room in the top 10. I've said in past breakdowns, I think it's 10 to 15 is anywhere 10 to 15 I'm comfortable with to start the season. Now, hopefully they can prove to be better than that, but you have them anywhere 10 to 15. I think that's a fair ranking when you consider the proven production that this group has, even though they haven't done it at Notre Dame. It's not like they've never done it. I mean, Bo Collins played in the ACC for 4 years. This isn't a kid that is transferring up from a lower level school like Chris Mitchell. Chris Mitchell is transferring up from a lower level school. So I understand you're not going to look at his production the same as if he did it in the Power 5 conference. However, as I've said before, we did see him play against a Power 5 team, an SEC team on the road, and he had 6 catches for 157 yards, most of which came in the first half, by the way. It wasn't like he put a bunch of junk yards on him late. So, but Phil Steele clearly gives Notre Dame's wide receiver room a lot of credit. Athon had no Notre Dame position groups in the top 10. Lindy's had the one, as I said, with quarterback. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. There's 3 position groups that get ranked here: D-line, linebacker, secondary. One of the magazines had all 3 ranked in the top 10. Nobody else had all 3 ranked in the top 10. And surprisingly, some of the groups were actually ranked a lot lower than I expected. So let's start off with the defensive line. Lindy's has them ranked 4th. Athon has them ranked 9th. And Phil Steele actually has them ranked 11th, which I thought was interesting. I did not anticipate because there is so much talent coming back. And he clearly undervalues, or not undervalues, isn't very high on Notre Dame's edge players. I was surprised also he had Nebraska 5th with their defensive line. And so some of those rankings I thought were very interesting, to say the least, to have them that high. So you have D-line a 4, Lindy's 9, Athon 11, Phil Steele. Now, Lindy's had all 3 position groups in the top 10, which I thought was interesting. Lindy's actually has Notre Dame's linebacker unit in the top 10. So I'm going to actually pull up kind of what they had, because I was surprised by that. When I was going through the magazines, I didn't think anybody was going to have Notre Dame's linebacker room ranked as high as they were. Lindy's had them ranked 9th. Let me just pull this up real quick, and I'll read you what they said. So they said, here's what they said about Notre Dame's linebacker room. They said senior Jack Kaiser is the quarterback of sorts on defense for the Fighting Irish, and he has sophomore Drake Bowen under his wing. Offenses must find Rover Jalen Sneed pre-snap since he's disruptive. Another second-year player, Jaden Osbury, will find a role too. So, and they didn't even mention Kingston. So they obviously have a lot of respect for Notre Dame's ability to kind of reload at that position. So 2 things are obvious from that ranking from Lindy's. Number 1, they thought Notre Dame's linebacking core was really good last year. If for them to have them 9th and they lost their top 2 starters at the position, clearly they thought last year's linebacker room was really good, which it was. It also tells us that they have paid attention to what's coming up and the talent that's coming up, and think very highly of that. So I thought that was interesting. They had the linebacker room actually ranked the same spot as the secondary, which I thought was really interesting. Phil Steele, however, is not very high on Notre Dame's linebacker room. He has them ranked 24th. Here's something wild. Again, you want to talk about just, I try not to be that fan that just, every time you don't love Notre Dame, it's like, oh, you're haters. I don't think Phil Steele's a Notre Dame hater by any stretch of the imagination at all. I just think he's really wrong. He has Miami of Ohio. He has their linebacker room ranked ahead of Notre Dame's. Seriously. He has Miami of Ohio's, not Miami, Florida, because he has Miami, Florida's ranked 15th. He has Miami of Ohio's linebacker room ranked 23rd. And he has Notre Dame's linebacker room, ranked 23rd. He has Notre Dame's ranked 24th. He has LSU's linebacker room ranked ahead of Notre Dame's, which I just thought was absolutely fascinating. So I get that they have Harold Perkins. It's a very good player, but I don't know that there's a single position group that LSU has that I would rank ahead of Notre Dame's. And so I looked at that, and I thought that was very, very interesting. Very interesting. And he also has Penn State ranked 6th, which I thought was high for a group who's, I thought, their top linebacker from last year now moved down. So looking back, boy, I got to tell you, man, he has SMU linebacker ranks 10th, TCU 11th. So there's a lot of players, a lot of teams that I would Missouri has ranked ahead of Notre Dame's linebacker room, Nebraska, Michigan State. I was a lot of head scratchers on this one. So having Notre Dame's linebacker room all the way down to 24, I can understand them not being in the top 10. I don't know that I would definitely have Notre Dame's linebacker room in the top 10 right now. Talent-wise, certainly. But they've got a lot to prove. And linebacker is a position where I personally value experience a little bit more than I do like running back. I don't care that Notre Dame doesn't have running back experience. Do not care one bit. I just think it's a position where experience isn't nearly as needed to thrive as it is at other spots. Receiver, I like it, but it's not a need. O-line, I definitely want experience. D-line, I want experience. Linebacker, I want experience. Safety, I'd prefer experience. But I still think the talent is such that there's no way I can justify having them outside the top 15. I thought that was a very, very interesting ranking. And so Phil, having them that low with Phil Steele was questionable. It's a couple. Again, he has some he has a lot higher. He has the receiver room 10th. He has the secondary 6th, which is fair. I mean, I would put him higher, but I think that's fine. But he's very down in the linebacker room. Speaking of the secondary, Lindy's has Notre Dame 9th in the secondary. Athlon had him highest. Athlon had him 3rd in their position rankings. So I thought that was I don't know that I'd go 3rd for the entire secondary, but it's certainly worth talking about. I think they're going to have a top 5 secondary. They have Ohio State number 1, Georgia number 2, Notre Dame number 3, Michigan number 4, and Iowa number 5. So I think top 5 for sure. 3 I'm okay with. I wouldn't put him any higher than 3 just because there's some other questions. There's some, who's going to replace Cam Hart? How's Jordan Clark going to be at nickel? Is Rod Hurd going to be able to make the transition to safety? Is Don Schuler going to be helped out? There's enough questions where I'm saying, okay, I'm definitely not putting him in the top 2. Plus, those other units have a lot of talent. But I'm comfortable top 3. And top 5 for sure is where they should be. But Lindy's has him 9th, which I thought was way too low. And Phil still has him 6th, which to me would be the bottom of where I would say, okay, you have him lower than that, then we've got a problem. And one of the interesting ones, he has Clemson ranked 4th in the secondary, which I just found to be incredibly, incredibly misguided. I mean, they lost their best corner, Nate Wiggins. Their best safety transferred to Texas, and one of their nickelbacks from last year is gone as well. Now, partly why he was gone, Toriano Pride, is he got beat out. So, I mean, that's but having their secondary that high, he has Oklahoma's secondary 2nd. Here's what I'm trying to figure out. When you look at Oklahoma last year, they gave up 23.5 points per game last season. They gave up 389 yards per game, and they gave up 5.4 yards per play. Yet, according to Phil Steele, they've got the number 2 secondary coming back in college football, the number 2 linebacker room coming back in college football, and their defensive line is 21st. So are we going to try to argue that Oklahoma's going to have a better defense than Notre Dame this year? Not sure what you're going to base that on. They have some really good individual players. The linebacker they have, Stutzman's a very good football player. But having Oklahoma ranked that high was a major head scratcher for me, and one that I would very much disagree with on Phil Steele. So that's where you have the rankings. You have 4 groups in the top 10 by Lindy's, 2 by Athlon, and 3 by Phil Steele. Secondary is the only group that is ranked in the top 10 by all outlets. I thought that was interesting too, because if you think about where Notre Dame has come over the years, 2-3 years ago, would you guys have been like, you know what? In a couple years, Notre Dame secondary is going to be a consensus top 10 secondary. Who had that on their bingo card a couple years ago? Ugh, ugh, I don't know. So those were head scratchers. Now, one thing I've tried to say I'm going to do, and we're going to do more of on this show, is if we're going to criticize people's rankings, then we're going to release our own rankings. And so, just so you guys know, as we get into the summer, IB will release a top 25. We will have our playoff predictions, and now it's not going to be like the IB top 25 will be mine. The playoff predictions will be kind of like everyone gives their own. We will come up with a top 10 position group ranking. So we'll do backfield, we'll do receiver, slight tight end combined, we'll do O line, we'll do D line, linebackers, and secondary. We'll do a top 10 offenses breakdown, top 10 defenses breakdown in college football, and we'll have our All-American squads as well. So we're going to have all that stuff, and it won't just be Notre Dame related. It'll be just all of college football. And so we'll do those during this show. And then when we put the podcast form up, we'll do that on the CFB Nation channel. So we'll do all that. And then we'll also have like an all opponent team. So we'll just have like, what would the quote unquote, like an all-American looking team be if we only included Notre Dame and their opponents? What would, and I'm thinking about doing that one of two ways. So if you all have some feedback on this, I'd love to hear it. I was thinking about doing an all opponent team that did not include Notre Dame players first, just so we can have, the top 11 players of the opponents, and then follow up with, if you included Notre Dame, here's who would be included in the list. And say if we were doing Notre Dame, I would have this player here on offensive line, or I'd have this player here on the D line. Like obviously I'd have our Howard Cross here. I'd have Riley Mills here. I'd have Benjamin Morrison here, Xavier Watts here, that type of thing. So I think that's the way I'm going to go is right now. So unless anybody has like a major objection to that, so we'll do with and without Notre Dame. So we're not going to because when we've done it in the past with just opponents, people would say, well, where would Notre Dame guys rank? Well, then you put Notre Dame guys in there. Now you're going to bump out other opponents, and it doesn't give as in depth on who the top opponent players are. So we're gonna do that and say here's the all opponent team, and then here's what it would look like if you include Notre Dame. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to rank the position groups, the opponent position groups, and go through that. So like rank the opponent offense, like top 5 offenses, top 5 defenses, and things like that. So we'll have a lot of that stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun this summer. All things we're going to have planned for you guys. Again, we will, during the live show portion, it will be here. But when it comes to when we publish it, when we put the podcast form up, so not the live video part up, we'll then put that up on the CFB Nation app and have it that way. So that's how that one's going to go. So we'll have that. I don't know that we'll get to it next week, but we'll definitely get to it starting in late June, early July. So, Vince and I got to get together and just kind of finish mapping out what our summer schedule is going to look like and what that's going to be. And, when I'm going to have Ryan on some of these shows too, because I want to get Ryan's input on some of this stuff as well. So we will have that. So that's something for you guys to keep your eye on as we move forward into the summer. Obviously, I have a ton of Notre Dame stuff, but we are going to talk national a little bit. We're going to talk about opponents a lot, and it's not just going to be Notre Dame all the time. Every show will have Notre Dame topics. So what I'm saying is like we'll talk some Notre Dame topic, and then we'll do like an opponent thing or a national thing and things like that. I don't know that we'll have a show where like, hey, we're just talking IB top 25 or All-American teams or whatever. It'll be like a half of a show or something along those lines. And so those are all aspects that I think are going to be interesting to look at and to dive into. And D-Troll Hunter, I see your comment. Take that to the board, man. Let's have that conversation and that debate. That's the kind of stuff I want to do. So obviously you guys will give feedback here, but that's what I love about the message board. That's why you need to sign up for boards.irishbreakdown.com, folks. And D-Troll Hunter is, because we can continue these conversations and have even more in-depth conversations on the message board than we can have in the chat. So all of those things are going to be a lot of fun. We will also then take those rankings and put them onto the website as well for people who like to read those things. So when we are done with our IB top 25, I'll publish on the website. I may do it first. When we have our All-American teams, we'll put those up. All that stuff will go up there. So I'm very, very much looking forward to that. So that's going to do it for this part of the show. Next, we're going to dive into talking about veterans that have to step up, sort of that last chance opportunity. We're going to dive into that next. But before we do, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you are listening and you're not live, go ahead and leave a comment. Tell us what you think about the show, ask questions, give us feedback, whatever. And of course, share the podcast, not just physically share it where you hit the share button, but also tell your friends about what we got going on here. All your Notre Dame friends and family, let them know you got to check out what they're doing at Irish Breakdown. And of course, best way to support us, the number one way, there's all types of different ways to support Irish Breakdown. The number one way to support us is to sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Part two of today's show is going to look at one of my favorite topics, which is sort of, and I've called it different things at different times, senior step up or last chance you type of thing. But essentially, at the heart of it is it's players that have either not been rotation guys that are going to become good rotation guys, veteran players that are looking to have more prominent roles, or veterans that if they're going to reach their full potential, they need this veteran to step up and play better football, his best football, whatever the case may be. So, when I look at a guy like Howard Cross, I'm not talking about Howard Cross being a guy this year. I'm not so much looking at younger players who may be breakouts. I'm not talking today about transfers. We'll have specific shows looking at expectations for the transfers. What I'm talking about is going back and saying, who are the veterans that are going to be in key roles that if they don't play well, it's going to hurt the team. Or in another situation, it could be they are players who, if they, like receiver I'll talk about, if they step up, it makes that unit even better. Even if they're going to be okay without them, if they step up, that's how they maximize their potential. And there's a reason this is important. Look, you're going to have young guys step up. You're going to have transfer step up. There's going to be all types of different players that emerge, and you need all of them. There's no one path to success. But when you look at Notre Dame's team over the years, and you look at just last 6 seasons, for example, and I brought back up 1988. I mean, we could have a discussion. Some of the folks that are even older than me could talk about guys that really stepped up and had big final seasons that were maybe good players in the past. Andy Heck was a solid player from all accounts, played tight end. Last year becomes an All-American, has that breakout type of season. You had other guys who were, rotation guys that came up that year and took over big roles. And those veteran players stepping up is a very important piece to what you're going to do. And they also had young players step up and junior step up, but you're always going to have those veteran players that take their game to another. Frank Stamps, Michael Parks said Frank Stamps is another great example. Guy that began his career as a fullback, was a rotation guy, but really took things to another level in 1988. You look at the past 6 years. Last year, I think you had a lot of guys like this. Mitchell Evans, to me, was a veteran player, a junior, senior type guy that a lot's expected on. Chris Tyree was that type of guy for Notre Dame last season. Maris Leofau on defense. Howard Cross on defense. Xavier Watts on defense. Javonte Jean-Baptiste on defense. Guys that, J.D. Bertrand just kind of kept doing what he did. DJ Brown just kind of kept doing what he did. But those 4 guys were all seniors or 5th or 6th year seniors. So Xavier Watts was a senior. Howard Cross is a 5th year guy. Maris was a 5th year guy. Javonte was a 6th year guy. All veterans that last season went out and raised their level of play significantly so. And without those, Notre Dame's not as good as they were last season as a team. I mean, we talked all offseason. Yeah, Maris is talented, but he's got to show me. Yeah, Xavier Watts has loads of ability, and we had him as one of our breakout players, but he's got to go prove it. And Howard Cross, what's he going to do now that he has a more full-time role? What kind of impact is Javonte Jean-Baptiste going to have? Now, again, I'm not talking about transfers now, but the point stands, he was a veteran player that stepped up. So you had minimum 6 guys that you could argue were juniors or older. And the only reason I included Mitchell Evans is because he played so much. I usually try to focus on like seniors or older, but Mitchell played a lot of football before. The year before in 2022, I looked through there's only 2. It was Braden Lindsey and Tariq Bracy. In 2021, it's harder to argue for those guys. It was Kevin Austin, right? And Kurt Heinisch really raised his level of play. I don't know that I would go with a lot of other guys that really jumped their game up. 2020, a lot more. Von McKinley I think he had like 13, 14 career catches going into that season. Breaks out as the team's leading receiver as a fifth-year senior. Liam Eichenberg, good player in the 2 years before. In his final season, takes his game to another level. He's an All-American consensus All-American player. Aaron Banks had started the year before, had played, but he was a very inconsistent player. Comes out in 2020, senior season, and he becomes an All-American, raises his game to a whole new level. That's 3 on offense. And then defensively, you saw Adetokunbo Ogundeji and Dalen Hayes go from backup rotation players to starters and top players on a team that went 10-0 and made the college football playoff. Myron Tungvaloa-Mosa had a breakout season for Notre Dame that season, I felt, as a senior. And then, of course, Nick McLeod transferred over from NC State and had that type of season as well. So you had got, and you could maybe even throw Sean Crawford into that conversation. Although I think Sean had moments before. His thing was just staying healthy. I thought Sean, even going back to 2017, was a really good player. So when you go back to the teams and you look at that team, really good team, a lot of veterans stepped up. 2019, Tony Jones Jr., Osmar Bilal. I don't know that you had a lot more of those veterans that stepped up and raised their level. There were some other veterans that were good before that were still good. But as far as guys that just really hadn't done a whole lot or really raised their level of play, you can maybe argue Chase Claypool was that kind of guy, but I think Chase was pretty good the year before. I thought Chase, by the end of the 2018 season, was actually every bit as good as what Miles Boykin was. Then you go to 2018. Again, it's a bigger list. Miles Boykin had a big-time breakout season as a senior. Dexter Williams went from rotational running back to impact player. Chris Fink went from rotation player in 17, was an okay player in 17, to an impact guy in 2018 in that role. You look at Alize Mack, inconsistent player, had shown some flashes, could never really put it all together, had a pretty good final season at Notre Dame. Defensively, Troy Pride has a breakout season for Notre Dame that year. You look at Jalen Elliott, had a breakout season. Now, Jalen had played the year before. Troy had played the year before, but they were very inconsistent players. They were kind of rotation guys who did some nice things, showed some flashes, but their true breakouts came in 2018. Alohi Gilman's another one. He didn't play the year before. He had to sit out the year before. He's a veteran player, steps in, and becomes a breakout player. So when you look at Notre Dame's 3 best teams, in my opinion, of the last 6 years, last year, 2020, and 2018, I do not view 2021 as that kind of team. I thought their schedule was incredibly soft. They weren't a very good football team. They won with a lot of smoke and mirrors and just having better players than everybody else. But 23, 20, and 18 all had a high number of players, veteran players that broke out and were able to raise their level of play, and that allowed that team to come closer to reaching their full potential. So who are those players for Notre Dame in 2024? Again, I'm going to exclude transfers. The list on offense is interesting because there really aren't a lot of guys on offense that I view as kind of being that, at least not skill-wise, because you do have a lot of transfers, but there are some very important players. And there's really 3 positions I'm looking at where I think if veteran players really step up, it's going to make the team, it could make the team better. And I'm going to begin outside. And I'm going to talk about Deion Colzie and Jaden Thomas. Now, I don't think Notre Dame needs both of them to step up, but they need at least one of them to really come out and have that season that we anticipate from both. And we hear every year, oh, Jaden Thomas is this and Jaden Thomas is that. And my response is, yeah, when he's healthy, he is that. In the last 2 years, when Jaden Thomas is healthy, he's as steady of a receiver as Notre Dame has had. He's a 4-catch 50. He's a minimum 4-catch 50-yard guy every time he's healthy. A bit hyperbolic every time, but you get the point, right? The problem is Jaden hasn't been able to be healthy. He hasn't taken his game to that next level. That includes being healthy, but also includes, okay, can you do that against the better teams on your schedule? Jaden did not play well against NC State, the only really good defense they played. He got hurt against Ohio State, but guess what? He didn't do a whole lot against Ohio State before then. So with Jaden, it's okay, you're steady, but you weren't as good as you needed to be in some of those bigger moments. He's got to prove he can be that. He's got to prove he can be healthy. If Jaden Thomas can be the guy that Notre Dame coaches think he is and the guy that he's shown at other times, he's going to be a weapon for Notre Dame. And he's not going to be a weapon from the sense of he's going to go out there and catch 8 balls for 120 yards every game. And he's going to be an All-American. But he is what I just said. He's steady. And when you have a first-year quarterback on your team, and again, not first year as a starter, but first year with your team, or if something happens to Riley Leonard and one of the young guys has to step in, having a dependable receiver is a tremendous asset. It's an incredibly good asset. The problem for Notre Dame is their 2 most quote-unquote dependable players in regard to when they're on the field, you can depend on them to get open and get the ball, are 2 of their most injury-prone players. And I'm talking about Mitchell Evans and Jaden Thomas. And so Notre Dame is going to need Jaden Thomas to be healthy all season and to be more consistent in the bigger moments. Keep doing what you're doing in all those other games. Give me those 3 to 5 catches for 50 to 60 yards every game. Give me that. That is money. He's going to have money third down plays. He's a guy that's going to make some plays when you need it, some red zone plays. But the big key for Jaden is he's got to stay healthy and he's got to do it more consistently. With Deion, he's one of the biggest enigmas on the roster. Deion has talent. There's no debating that. Talented player, big kid, 6'4 plus, 215 plus. We had someone, and I don't know if he listens to the show, but he definitely is on our message board. And he was at the Irish Invasion, and his son was there working out. And he says to me, and I'm paraphrasing, he's like, I didn't realize Deion Colzie was that big. And when you see him in person, you realize Deion is a big kid. He's shown flashes. The Syracuse game 2 years ago should have had 10 catches if the quarterback would have thrown the ball. Made some big plays against USC. We've seen Deion show flashes of it. Navy last year made, not only had a touchdown grab, but also had a great diving catch near the sideline. The problem is with Deion is sometimes he's struggled to stay healthy also, but then at times he'll look great at times, and then other times he's just kind of there. He's just kind of going through the motions. Consistency is going to be the key for Deion. Stay healthy, but be consistent. Somebody in the chat just said, I wish Deion could find that dog in him, and I 100% agree. Deion's a guy that Deion is this year's version of Maris Leofau for us, in that, at least for me, I don't speak for the rest of my team, but for me, in that he's that guy that I'm at the point now where I love him. I think he's got talent, but I got to see it. I've got to see it before I'm going to kind of get into, okay, he's that guy. I just have to see it. And until Deion can be sort of that guy consistently, that's going to be the knock. I need to see it. You can't count on him right now. He's got to prove to you that he's accountable, that he's dependable. But if Deion Colzie can step up then and be the guy we all think he can be, you've got a guy that can be a difference maker. Like Jaden Thomas, I think that Bryan NY in the chat has a really good comparison. Like when you look at Jaden Thomas, Jaden is just that steady, professional type of guy that's going to get open, catch 4 or 5 balls, 50, 60 yards, be a good third down weapon. And just, you look at the end of the game and he's not sexy and he doesn't blow you away. And you just look down at stat sheet and you're like, oh, he had 4 catches for 65 yards. That's, I think 3 of his 4 catches went for first downs. Okay. Yeah. That's a good day's work. Deion's kind of the opposite of him, where Deion is a guy that has that big time, in my opinion, big time ability to be a Miles Boykin type, to be a Chase Claypool type with 6'4", 6'5" speed, size. He's got legit 4.5 type speed. And when you're 6'4", 6'5", 215, and you're running a 4.5, you're moving. And we've seen him. I talked about this in fall camp last year. We're sitting there in practice, and he goes and runs a post route on Benjamin Morrison. It's not that he fooled Benjamin. He sticks that post route and just accelerates away from Benjamin and gets to the end zone, and he's got him beat by 4 or 5 yards. Ball comes, hits him in the hands, he drops it. And that's kind of the frustrating thing with Deion is like, dude, be locked in. Like, this is your chance to go. You just had a chance to go smoke your best cornerback, and you did smoke him, and you dropped the ball. Like, those are the things with Deion that just get frustrating. And I don't think he was in a good situation last year, because I don't think he was coached well by Chancey Stuckey. I don't think Coach Stuckey really had the kind of respect for Deion that he should. I don't think he had the passion to coach Deion, to work with Deion. I just feel like he did not he did a poor job coaching. On Deion's side, Deion's got to be more assertive because Stuckey's not here. And we go out to the Jersey scrimmage, and it's not Deion Colsey that's the first guy on the field at the boundary. It's Micah Gilbert, a true freshman. What does that say about Deion? Well, to me, it tells me that the coaches are trying to encourage him to, they're trying to find whatever way they can to push the buttons to get him where he needs to get to. Because this is a young man that has a lot of talent, but you just need him to kind of put it all together. And if he does, he's a difference maker. If he doesn't, I think you're okay because you do have Micah Gilbert, you do have Jaden Thomas, you do have Bo Collins, you have some options there. But if he does, he could be pretty good. And you could throw Bo Collins in this conversation as well, but we're going to hold off on Bo until we talk about the transfer impact specifically. This is more for just returning players. So one of those two guys has to step up to really solidify the receiver room this year. They could be okay if neither of them do, but for this team to reach its full potential, at least one of those two guys has to be a key player for Notre Dame this year, receiver. Let's move on to the offensive line because there's two different positions that I think could be impacted by this. And I'm going to talk about one quickly, and that's Tosh Baker, right tackle. Now, this is an interesting one because Tosh could end up getting beat out, whether it's Emil Wagner, whether it's Gerby Lambert. There's a chance Tosh could get beat out. However, there's also hope that Tosh kind of puts it all together and becomes that type of player that we all thought he could be when he signed with Notre Dame. A guy that I had as a top 100 type of player, a guy that I think could be a very steady, solid starter. And if Tosh can just be consistent, because if you break down his blue gold performance, for example, and he say played 30 snaps, and you're like, 26 of those snaps were really solid, nothing dominant, just really solid. But then you look at the 4 snaps where he gets beat, and you're like, that was bad. Like, it was very glaring, and that has always been the case. Like, Tosh will be solid. Somebody, he doesn't touch a guy. Solid. Gets smoked on a double move. Solid. Guy gets into his chest, drives him into the quarterback. Those are the type of things that Tosh has got to work out. The talent, there's talent for him to be a solid player. I don't think he's ever going to be what I thought he was going to be. He never developed the power as he put weight on. He slowed down. He wasn't as athletic as a veteran player as he was when he was in high school because of in my opinion, that his body couldn't handle the weight the way some other guys did. Just it's part of it. That's always the risk you run sometimes with bigger guys that have to put on a lot of weight. But I still think he can be a steady player, and they need him to, because if Tosh can become a steady, solid player, then one of two things is going to happen. One, he's going to lock down the right tackle position and give you a level of confidence that, hey, I'm not going to get a dominant performance there, but I can get a nice, steady performance there from my right tackle. Or two, if Tosh does what he needs to do and is that solid, steady player, but doesn't start because somebody beat him out, then that's going to say a lot about, what he can do from an impact standpoint. Because, I see this and I see it in the chat. Somebody talking about, very concerned about Tosh Baker and pass pro. But again, if you watch Tosh play, he's very good in pass pro the majority of the snaps. It's just that when he gets beat, it's very noticeable. And it's usually pretty bad. And so he'll always kind of have a higher grade percentage-wise from did you execute your assignment? But it's just when he doesn't, he gets beat bad. And that's what he's got to knock out. The problem is Emil has that same problem. That you watch him in practice, you watch him in the Jersey scrimmage. He played very well in the blue gold game, but in the Jersey scrimmage the week before, Emil looked just like Tosh. Good, whipped. Good, doesn't touch a guy. Good. Guy gets into his chest and drives him into the quarterback. That's the problem, is both guys have the same issue. Now, Emil's got more, I think, God-given ability right now, but he's undersized and light in the lower body. Tosh has got the size now, but he's not a super powerful guy. So it's a concern there either way. And we'll talk about Emil in a future show. So Tosh Baker's a guy that, to me, needs to step up and handle himself much better and be more consistent. The other position on offense is left guard. What's interesting is you've got Billy Schrauth having entrenched himself at right guard. As long as Billy keeps doing what he's doing, I mean, of course, anytime he could go home and spend all summer, eating Cheetos and watching TV and not working out, and he'll get beat out. I mean, that can happen. We've seen that before. But if he does what he does, is capable of doing, just keep doing what you're doing, he's going to be a really good player. And he's going to have a right guard locked down. Left guard's the bigger question mark. And there's two guys here, and one of them needs to step up, in my opinion. The first is the guy that, as of right now, is the expected starter at left guard. That's Pat Coogan. This is a guy that Joe Rudolph loves, and I get it to a degree. He's a smart kid. He's going to give you everything he's got. He's very coachable. I mean, I hear nothing but great things about him from a personality standpoint. The problem is he's just not very talented, and you see that last year. I mean, I believe he led the offensive line in most pressures allowed. I'm going to pull up that statistic here while we're talking and look at that. But if let's see here, pass blocking, I'm looking at the Pro Football Focus rankings right now. And all right, let's see here. So most pressures allowed last year is Pat Coogan by 10. He gave up 25. The next closest was Rocco and Blake Fisher at 15 apiece. If you look at Rocco's per snap production, he would have still given up fewer sacks or pressures last year than would have Pat Coogan if he would have played the whole season. Blake Fisher was at 15. Zeke Correll was at 10. Billy Schroth was at 6. Joe Walt was at 5. So you look at it and say, that's a problem, right? You can't have a guard give up 25 pressures. Just can't happen. Can't allow it. You can't have a guard give up 8 hits on your quarterback. Just can't happen. And Rocco gave up 7. Rocco actually allowed more hits on the quarterback, even though Pat Coogan gave up more pressures. And he's a guy that just doesn't get great movement in the run game. So when you look at it, you say, boy, the left guard position's got to get better. And Pat Coogan's got to raise his level of play. The concern I have is I didn't think he played very well in the Jersey scrimmage, and he played very poorly in the blue gold game. You just didn't see that jump from him. Very limited sample size. Right, we saw 2 practices at full. We saw 3 full practices out of 15. That's it from him. For all we know, the other 12 he was great, but in the 3 we saw, he struggled, and he's going to have to raise his level of play. Then there's Rocco Spindler. Now, Pat Coogan playing better is going to help the offensive line. There's no doubt. But if we're talking about this team maximizing its potential as a football team, Rocco Spindler's got to be one of the guys that breaks out. I would argue, and I want to know what you guys think about this in the chat, is this. I would argue that of the returners, the guys that are on the team that I view as being eligible for this conversation, it's like I don't count Mitchell Evans. You don't count guys that are already established. I'm talking about these type of guys that need to really raise their level of play. I would argue that none of them on offense stepping up and playing to their full potential has a bigger impact on this offense than Rocco Spindler. I would argue Deion Colzie's next. But I think if Rocco can become the guy we all hope he can be, the guy he was in the blue gold game, and the guy he was at times last season, then we could see him really step up and be an impact player. Because here's the biggest difference between Rocco and Pat Coogan. They have similar flaws. Neither of them are great athletes. And they both gave up too many pressures in the pass game last year. Very similar flaws. Here's the 2 huge differences. Number 1, Rocco, well, they're kind of the same thing, but they're the 2 things that are similar for Rocco, but are way different from Pat Coogan. One is Rocco's a lot bigger, at least 20 pounds bigger, and Rocco can move people. Like when Rocco's playing well, he can be dominant in the run game, especially. And you don't need him to be an elite pass protector. But in this blue gold game, he handled himself effectively in pass pro. But he's a mover. Like that's the thing is if Rocco can emerge as your left guard, you're talking about a left guard that's 325 and your left tackle's 330, and you're going to have road graders there on the left side of the line. You're going to have 2 guys that can just be dominant. Now, people say, well, a lot of teams like to run right more than left, right? Correct. Teams tend to run right more than they run left. However, when you're a heavy inside zone team, when you're running right, inside zone, the way that Notre Dame will run it under Mike Denbrock is meant to cut backside. You're actually running behind your backside. So if you go back and look at the two, that because I did a breakdown on this, and I'm pretty confident that I remember the numbers correctly. But if you actually go back and look at the inside zone, Notre Dame ran inside zone to the right more than they ran it to the left. Now you think to yourself, well, why would you run inside zone away from Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey? Again, because the way inside zone is supposed to hit, it's supposed to be a vertical insert somehow behind the left guard and left tackle. That's your cutback side, and inside zone is meant to be a cutback run. So if you've got that big physical 325 plus left side that has movers, Charles Jagasaw can absolutely move people. Go look at what Rocco did to Donovan Heinisch on Jeremiah Love's touchdown run. Was it Jeremiah Love? Was it his touchdown run, or was it Kenny Minchie's touchdown run? Might have been Kenny Minchie's touchdown run, because I think Jeremiah Love was on the blue team. So I'm thinking, so his run was different. Rocco was on the white team. So I think it was Kenny Minchie's touchdown run. And go watch what Rocco did to Donovan Heinisch on that snap. But that's what he has. It's what he brings to the table, is that ability to dominate and move people. If he can just be solid in the pass game, just get in front of people, man. That's all I need you to do. I need you to dominate the pass game. Just do your job in the pass game. He could be a very big difference maker for this offensive line. He really could. Now, I don't know that Rocco's going to do that. He needs to prove it. But I just look at the talent of the offensive line, and other than like a Sullivan Absher or a Sam Pendleton or somebody like that kind of figuring it out real quickly and just pushing their way on the field, could happen. But even then, I still feel like fifth-year senior version of Rocco would be better for Notre Dame than sophomore version of anybody else. I do. I think Rocco still has a chance to be the player I thought he could be. Now, I didn't grade him as a top 100 guy like some people did. I didn't think they were way off. I had him as a top 150 guy just because I did have some questions about his athleticism as a senior. I didn't think he was as athletic as a senior as he was in previous years. But I still liked him. A top 150 player is a good football player. If Rocco plays like that caliber player this season, he could have a huge impact on the offensive line, and he could have a huge impact on the run game, because if you plop him in that left guard spot right next to Charles Jagasaw, you're going to run the ball really well, really well. And so you can run at them, you can run behind them. It gives you some impact potential there. That's the thing for me. So what does Rocco got to do to be better? He's got to be more consistent with his assignments, and he's got to be more consistent with his feet. He's not a very agile guy. He's not a real nimble player. So he's got to be very careful not to plant his feet the way that he does. He's got to be much more agile. And I thought he did a really good job of that in the spring game, where he was more on the balls of his feet, had a nice base, had some bend, and we saw him change direction relatively well for what he can do. When he got in trouble last year, he'd get real heavy-footed, and when he would then have to plant and move, he'd be all out of balance, out of whack, and wouldn't get out slow. And I remember the play that I've talked about before where he was going one way and a guy kind of twists inside and he goes to pick that guy up, but he was so heavy-footed that he went to turn and he just falls down. Like, that can't happen, man. Like, that can't happen. You can't be that unsound technically. But there's other blocks in that game. Even though the offensive line struggled, there's about 3 or 4 blocks in that game where you watch Rocco just drives him off the ball. You're like, okay, man, I wish we can get that more often. So if Rocco can be that guy more often, he's going to have a chance to have a very big impact on this football team. Very big impact. So he's a guy that I hope for Notre Dame is a breakout player. I hope at the end of the year, at least one of those receivers and Rocco, if that's all that steps up for this offense this year, that's the only 2 veterans that really raise their play, or Dion and Rocco. But Rocco and one of the receivers, if at least those 2 guys step up this year, this offense is going to get a big boost, very big boost. And I think Rocco could provide the biggest of all. He's got to prove it, but the talent's there. Let's go to the other side of the ball. Let's talk about the defense, because there's a few guys here as well. It's not a big list because there's already a lot of established players. I mean, you already know who Xavier Watts is. We already know what Benjamin Morrison is. We know what Howard Cross is. There's some younger players like Josh Burnham and Drake Bowen and Jalen Sneed and Christian Gray that we'll talk a lot about that are potential breakouts that also need to play. But when we look at the veterans, guys that need to raise their level of play that could have the biggest impact on the team, there are some, and they could be impactful. And honestly, to a degree, these guys are going to tell us whether or not this defensive team is really, really good, or they could have a big impact on it being truly elite. Like, okay, you can ride this to a deep playoff run. You can ride this group to a championship. I think a lot of these players are going to be part of that. Obviously, you need Xavier to keep doing what he's doing. You need Benjamin to keep doing what he's doing. You need Howard Cross to keep doing what he's doing. These guys taking their game to another level, to me, is huge. And this is not going to so much start in order of most importance. It's going to kind of go by position. So follow me here. So I'm going to first start at linebacker, and it's Jack Kaiser. Jack has been a very steady player for Notre Dame in the last 3 years. He's a 3-year starter. This is going to be his 4th year basically as a starter. Now, he only, quote unquote, started 3 games last year because Notre Dame would start a lot of games in their nickel package, but he was their top rover. And he played over 300 snaps each of the last 2 years. And I've broken down this before. Don't need to dive into it again too much. But on a per snap basis, he was one of their most impactful He was their most impactful linebacker last year on a per snap basis. That was as the rover. Well, now Jack is going into he's going into a different role. I mean, just simply put, he's going into a much different role this season. And it's a role where he's going to be asked to do things that he has done, but not things that he's necessarily thrived at. And when you look at Jack last year and you look at the first 5 games of the year, his lowest grade on Pro Football Focus and basically his lowest grade for me, for when I grade the team and I grade the how they played, was the Central Michigan game where he started at middle linebacker in place of J.D. Bertrand. Because at times in the past when Jack has played inside, he's had some good moments and some not so good moments. The not so good moments had to do with a lot about size and length. Can he keep blockers off of him? His block destruction hasn't always been great. He can run. I mean, that kid can run. Jack Kaiser's might be the most unappreciated athlete that Notre Dame has on the team. And I was told a story by somebody close to the team that, Jalen Sneed's freshman year at Notre Dame, he was kind of talking about how fast he was. And I don't know if he challenged him or one of the veterans challenged him to a race, but he raced Jack Kaiser and got beat. And it wasn't by a step or two. He was clearly faster. Now Jalen's gotten faster. And that's not to say Jalen Sneed's not as fast as we thought, because we have verified times on Jalen Sneed as a 40, at least I do. But Jack Kaiser's really fast and can run. The question is, can he play in the box? We don't know the answer to that. He's done it at times. So there's times, and I'm going to try to have a breakdown on this. One of the breakdowns I'm going to do this summer, this is going to be for premium message board only guys, is I'm actually break down the rover position. I'm going to show all the responsibilities of the rover position and dive into that and break that down. So I'll use all 22 film, get into that. It's going to be a really good breakdown. I have that at some point in time this summer. There are times when the rover has to slide inside and play in the trash. And Jack had some good moments and some pretty ugly moments inside. He's had 2 starts as a middle linebacker. He started last year against Central Michigan as a middle linebacker. And then in 2022, when J.D. Bertrand was suspended for the first half of the North Carolina game for targeting, Jack was also starting middle linebacker then. I didn't think he played great in either game, to be completely honest with you. And so he's a guy that's going to have to show that when he's inside more frequently, that he can play better. Can he have the same per snap impact as an inside player as he did outside? That's the big question. Like, when you talk about Jack and how impactful he was last year, it's good to focus on and give him credit for where credit is due, but it doesn't mean that he's going to be able to do that on a full-time basis at inside linebacker. It's a different position. It's different responsibilities. So to me, Jack Kaiser is a guy that you look at and say, they need him to step up and be a better player. Look, he's going to play, guys. There's no way in the world, barring injury, that Al Golden is going to go into the season without Jack Kaiser playing at least 40 snaps a game. I just don't see how there's any scenario that happens. So he's going to have to play. He's going to have to play well. He's capable of it, but he's going to have to play well. We just got to see how that transfer is going to be. If Jack steps up, and if his per snap production is similar to what it was last year, then you're going to get even better player from the will position than you did last year. I think Jack Kaiser's capable of that, along with whoever's in the rotation with him, of giving even more impact production than we saw last year. And that's pretty good because Maris Leofau had a solid season and was a third-round draft pick. So, but they're going to need him to step up. If he doesn't step up, the linebacking core can't be as good as it's capable of. You do not want to go into the season asking all of your young sophomores and freshmen to be the guy. Like if he doesn't pan out, let's say that Kingston steps into the lineup because Jack's not getting the job done, and it's Drake at Mike and Kingston at will, or it's Drake at Mike and Jalen Sneed at will, or Jaden Osborne at will, whoever. You're going to be talented there, but you're not going to be as good as you would be if Jack steps up and plays to his ability, because he's one of your best athletes. He's your most experienced guy. He's a 6th-year senior. This is going to be his 4th year as a starter. He's played way over 1,000 snaps in his career. Actually, I'm curious to see what his snap count actually is. So he played 338 last year, according to Pro Football, or in 2022. He played 354 last year, so that's 690, about 690 something. And then he played 398 in 2021. And then in 2020, he played another 129. So he's got way over 1,000 career snaps. So this is a guy that's played a lot of football. You need him to be at his best. You just do. He's the linebacker, the veteran linebacker. Is the only veteran linebacker that's got to step up. I don't have any veterans in the secondary, because the only veterans in the secondary that there's 2 types of veterans in the Notre Dame secondary. There's the established guys, Xavier Watts, Benjamin Morrison. I don't really count Jaden Osborne or Jaden Mickey as a veteran. I think he's fine if he steps up, great. But I've other reasons why I'm not going to talk about him, because I think Jaden's going to be a good player. And then the others veterans are transfers. It's Jordan Clark and Rod Hurd. Everybody else in the secondary is young. It's a freshman or sophomore. So nobody in the secondary. So we're going to go back up front. And there's 3 players I got my eye on. One is a guy that's in a rotation, and it's a guy that Notre Dame's going to get back this year. It's Gabriel Rubio. I think Gabriel Rubio stepping up this year is going to be very, very important for Notre Dame. Very important. He's a guy that last year when he played was a pretty good player. He wasn't super disruptive. He wasn't a guy that made a ton of tackles for loss or sacks or anything like that. He didn't have a ton of pressures, but he's a force. I mean, he was a guy that when you looked at Notre Dame last year, he was a guy that teams had to worry about there. He caught a lot of double teams. He was a guy that was very stout against the run. He was one of the players when he was in the game where you were going to have a hard time moving him, which allowed the linebackers to come off and be effective. So he did some good things, but what you need from him this year is more. You need more. You need Gabriel to go from being a solid rotation player when healthy to a guy that's counted on every week, and a guy that when you look at and say, hey, this guy is an impact player coming off the bench. And we'll talk about Jason Onye as well. I could have talked about Jason Onye here, but I'm going to save him for the breakout show. So we'll talk about him later. But Gabriel Rubio is that veteran player who could be a breakout player as part of the rotation. He could certainly be there, but I'm talking about him here because they need him more than any other depth defensive lineman to step up and be at his best this season and really take his level of play to another level. If he just gives you what he gave you last year and he's healthy for every game, that's good. It's good depth. But if he can step up and say, hey, coach, when you put me in the game, I'm a difference maker, that's even better for them. And there's 2 reasons why. Number one, when you take your when you take your All-American off the bench, Howard Cross, or you take Riley Mills off the bench, because sometimes Gabriel can play 3, but I like him more at nose. There's not a drop-off. You're actually bigger there. Not quite as athletic, obviously, but you're bigger there. You're still impactful there. So, and you guys hear me talk about it all the time, how important it is that there not be a drop-off. If you're going to throw waves at people, and I'm a big fan of rotations, and I'm a big fan of rotations everywhere except quarterback, really, if I'm being honest. And most line spots, but you can get away with like an offensive line spot where you're able to rotate. Harry Heastand did that in 2017. Quarterback O-line's where I want to kind of have the same guy. Everywhere else, I like rotations. They got to be smart rotations, and my issue last year with Notre Dame was they weren't smart rotations. But I'm okay with a deeper bench, especially now that you got to win 16 games to play for the to win a national championship. But the problem is, if there's a big drop off between 1 and 2, it's harder to justify bringing in number 2 in those big games or any competitive game, even if it's not a big opponent, but it's competitive. So Gabriel can give that. He just needs to do it. The other part of that, the second part of that, is that if Gabriel can be that player, not only do you have a less of a drop off, but you can now play him more. You don't need to play Howard Cross 40, 45 snaps a game now. You don't need Howard Cross to be such a heavy burden of a player. I broke this down before. So when you look at Notre Dame's defensive line last year and you look at the number of snaps they played and you compare that to Michigan, for example. So last year, Notre Dame's top 2 defensive linemen, Howard Cross and Riley Mills. Howard Cross played 610 snaps. Riley Mills played 535, and that was in 13 games. If you look at Michigan's defensive line last year, the team that won a championship, right, the national championship, had a very, very good defensive interior, defensive tackle group. Some people will even say that their interior is better than Notre Dame's. It's at least debatable, but it's one thing that's not debatable. It's very good. So they played 15 games last year as a team. Notre Dame's top 2 guys, 610 snaps, 535 snaps. Michigan's top 2 defensive tackles last year had 442 and 418 snaps. Why? Because they were deeper. They not only had the 2 starters that had 442 and 418, but Kenneth Grant played 403 and Rayshawn Benny played 244. And then you had Cam Good played 267. You had 5 guys with 240 snaps or more on the defensive line, the defensive interior. When you look at Notre Dame last year, you had 610 from Howard Cross. Riley Mills had a 535. The next highest was Jason Onye at 155. Gabriel Rubio only played 136 snaps last season, partly because he only played 9 games, but also partly because they didn't play him as much. So when you look at the number of snaps that they played, you've got to be able to take that burden off of them, make them fresher in the fourth quarter, and then make sure that they're definitely able to hold up for an entire 12-game season and then a 4-game playoff run. You need Gabriel Rubio to step up and do that. If you're going to be the team you're capable of, guys like Rubio step up and say, hey, I can take 10 snaps a game off Howard Cross's shoulders, right? Because if you take 10 a game and just let's look at the 13 games, 10 a game, that's 130 snaps. Now Howard's dropping down to 480. That's much more in line with the Michigan guys, but that's still more than what the Michigan guys had in 2 more games. But still, that's 130, just 10 snaps a game. That's 130 snaps you're taking off of his plate over the course of a 12+1 season. 12 games plus your first postseason game, which is comparing it to last year's numbers. That's going to be huge because if you're going to make a playoff run, Howard Cross is going to have over 600 snaps. What you can't have is you're going into the postseason with him close to 600 snaps. He needs to be in the 400s going into the postseason so he can be more fresh going into the stretch run. Same thing is true for Riley Mills. Jordan Botelho is another player that, to me, has to step up. Look, I don't care if Boubacar Traore has a breakout or not when I make this statement. Of course, Boubacar breaking out has an impact. I've said before that I don't know that anyone on defense can have a bigger impact on that unit with a breakout than can Boubacar. If Boubacar becomes the guy that we think he can be, that Notre Dame thinks he can be, he's a guy that could have maybe creep up on double digits in sacks. He's that type of explosive athlete. He really is. Huge impact. But even if he does that, you still need Jordan Botelho to step up. Because imagine if Boubacar does that. Boubacar is still very much a work in progress when it comes to a complete game. Right now, he's a pass rusher that's learning to play the other parts of the game. He's not a guy you want playing 50 snaps a game. You want him being able to come in and just disrupt. You're going to need Jordan Botelho to play a lot of snaps this year, even if Boubacar Traore steps up. And you're going to need him to play better. He's got to be more physical. He's got to expand his pass rush repertoire. He had like 2 pass rush moves last year. He's got to be a guy that's more locked in all the time. Jordan, and it's not even just about production. Think about the spring game, the blue gold game. 3rd down play, quarterback drops back, believe he throws an incomplete pass. Play gets a flag gets thrown. Why? Because Jordan Botelho's offsides. Fifth-year senior defensive ends offsides. They run the third down play again, get a first down, eventually score. I forget the sequence of how they scored, but they scored. You can't have that from a fifth-year senior. Like that can lose you a game. That can lose you a football game. That type of mistake, third down, you're about to kick a field goal, but your mistake allows them to get on the field, have another play, pick up the first down, they go down and get a touchdown. 4-point swing, maybe a 7-point swing, depending on whether or not they would have made the field goal. You can't have that from a fifth-year senior. It's stuff like that really frustrates you when you're looking at Jordan Botelho, because then you watch games like he had against Syracuse in 2022, South Carolina 2022, where and some flashes here and there. I didn't think he was that good. Really, he was a solid run defender early. He wore down real quick. He's got to be better. Now, does that mean he was too heavy? I don't know what the issue is. Maybe it was too heavy, and that's why he just wasn't as explosive. It's possible. We talk about that. But I don't want to say that I know that's why, because I don't know that's why. But it doesn't matter. What matters is, whatever the reasons, he's got to be better. You need Jordan Botelho to be a better player this year. There's no doubt. And if he doesn't step up, then you're not going to be as good as Vipers you need to be to go out and compete for a championship. Jordan Botelho has one last chance to make an impact on this football team. They need him to do it. And I don't care if it's Boubacar steps up and does it. That doesn't change my opinion. Of course, I care that Boubacar steps up. You guys understand what I'm saying, right? It's not that I don't care if Boubacar steps up or not. What I'm saying is Boubacar breaking out has no bearing on whether or not you need a breakout from Jordan Botelho. If Emil Wagner breaks out and has a great fall camp and wins the right tackle job, or Gerby Lambert does, then it doesn't matter if Tosh Baker breaks out or not, because he got beat out anyway. You know what I mean? Like, with this position, even if Boubacar breaks out, you're still going to need Jordan Botelho. He's still going to be a guy that you're going to have to play a lot, and they're going to need him to play better, and they need him to do so. Here's the final guy for me, because I'm going to actually talk about – this is one of the few guys I'm going to talk about in multiple shows, because he applies to so many things. The last one for me is a guy that, in my view, could have an even bigger impact than anybody on this list if he can put it all together, and that's Riley Mills. Riley Mills is probably the most polarizing, I guess maybe is the word I want to use there. I'm not sure, there might be a better one. He's a guy that I think is underappreciated by Notre Dame fans, very much so. I hear a lot of talk about he wasn't that good last year, and I'm like, no, he actually was pretty good last year. But I kind of understand why people are down on him. Number one, he didn't make as many plays on the ball as Howard Cross. Now, I've pointed out in the past that his per snap production was better than Howard Cross's last year in the pass game. I've pointed that out. More hits on the quarterback per snap, more pressures per snap. He's overall more disruptive last year than Howard Cross was. However, Riley, like with Howard, and this is why I think that when people look at Howard Cross, they see a 6'1", 275, 208-pound guy that's giving you everything he's got. And so when he goes out and has 60 tackles and 7 tackles for loss and 2 sacks, you're just like, man, I love that guy. And he was clutch. He was very clutch. And then you see a guy like Riley Mills, who was good for Notre Dame last year. I mean, again, Pro Football Focus had him ranked as a top 15 defensive tackle last year. You look, and I've said this, I thought Riley Mills was a good football player for Notre Dame last year. But he had 5.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. Now, he did that playing a lot fewer snaps than Howard Cross did. He played 75 fewer snaps than Howard Cross did last year, and he had 83 fewer pass rush snaps than Howard Cross did last year, but only had 7 fewer pressures and had more hits on the quarterback. Last year, Riley Mills had 12 hits on the quarterback. Howard Cross had 8, right? That's a big difference. It's a very big difference. But when you look at Riley Mills, you see the complete opposite of Howard Cross. With Riley Mills, you see a guy that has everything you want. He's 6'5". He's over 300 pounds. He's got broad shoulders, big, long arms, big, thick lower half. He's athletic. He's disruptive. And you say, how is this guy not more dominant? So even though his per snap production is better than Howard Cross's, He had plenty of impactful moments. I mean, he was excellent against USC last year. He was better against USC last year, in my opinion, than Howard Cross was. And they were both pretty good in that game. He was excellent in that game. He had a great performance in the bowl game the year before. Like when Howard Cross is on, he was very good against Ohio State as well. He was pretty darn good against Duke. He was very good against USC. He was very good in the bowl game. He was very good against Stanford. Like when he's on, I mean, he was one of the few guys that played well against Clemson, in my opinion, on the D line. But then there's moments where he just doesn't really do a whole lot, or he doesn't make impact plays, or he'll get to the backfield and then not finish. And I've said this, if Riley Mills would have finished on half the plays he had a chance to finish on last year, he's a 10-plus tackle for loss guy. So I think it's the expectation is so much greater because he's 6'5", he's over 300 pounds, he's athletic, immense talent. So there's no doubt that if Riley Mills, if he just does what he does last year, is going to be part of a very, very good defensive tackle unit. However, Riley Mills has also got a lot more in him, in my opinion. He's a guy that's capable of way more. And that may seem like I'm asking a lot, but I view a guy like I've talked about Howard Cross's potential Sheldon Day type of breakout when I was talking about the star players. Like I don't view Howard Cross as a star yet. And I set very clearly what I think a star player needs to be on that position. He's close. He's in the conversation, but he's not a star yet. Riley Mills is the type of guy that I think has the chance to have the Jalen or Sheldon Day type of senior year breakout, a Jerry Tillery type senior year breakout, because he's the guy that has a chance to truly be that dominant player. Like if Riley Mills can be locked in and play with consistent technique, consistent focus, consistent motor, consistent finish all year, he's an All-American, in my opinion. He's a 10-plus tackle for loss guy, 5 to 7 sacks, big moment guy, 4 or 5 breakups. Like that's what he can be. Now he's a long way away from that. I will give you that. But the talent is there. And it's not based on high school ranking or anything else. It's based on what I see on film. What you'll see on film from not just at snaps, but in games. There's certain games you're like, dude, that is a guy that should be dominating. That is a guy that should just be kicking butt and just a heck of a football player. But then you don't see it enough, and he'll just be kind of just okay at times. He is the defensive version of Rocco and then some. Because as I said about Rocco on offense, of all the veterans, if Rocco breaks out, he has a bigger impact than anybody else that I talked about. Riley Mills is that example because we know what Howard Cross is going to be. I think we know what Howard Cross is going to be, right? And that's a pretty darn good high motor, impact guy, makes plays when you need him to, 7 to 8, 9 tackles for loss, 2-3 sacks, just a heck of a football player. With Riley Mills, if Riley becomes the player he's capable of being, he's a star, in my opinion. He has that ability. Will he get there? Don't know. But if he does, he could end up being, I don't know if he's your best player on defense, but I think he could be in that conversation. I do. And I know that there's some of you listening like, no way, he's got to. I get all that. I'm not even going to tell you you're nuts for feeling that way. I get it. I get why there's hesitation about Riley. But the one thing I see is a kid with a lot of ability. And if he can turn that potential into production, consistent production, I think he has a breakout year. There's no reason he can't have 11, 12 tackles for loss, 5 to 6 sacks, and just be a heck of a football player. There's no reason he can't do that. He just needs to figure it out. And it's going to be up to Al Washington and Al Golden to kind of find the right buttons to push. And then at the end of the day, Riley's got to step up and say, hey, do you want this or not? Do you want to be this guy or not? And if he puts it all together, well, it's going to be a fun year to watch this defensive line. There's no question about that. So that's going to do it for my breakout players. I'm going to dive into a little bit of film room here next, folks. But before we do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Would love it if you give us a 5-star review. If you're listening via one of our podcast partners, whether it be Spotify or any others, you can find our podcast a lot of different places. And of course, if you are got some time here and want to support Irish Breakdown and you've asked yourself, I really like what they do. I want them to keep doing what they're doing. I would love for them to be able to grow their team and do even more. I want to support them more. Best way to support us, all of the different watching shows, reading articles, super chats, buying merch. All those things are great ways to support Irish Breakdown. The very best way of all of them, ranked at the top, number one ranking, is to sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Monthly membership, annual membership. If you want to join the booster club and go above and beyond, we'd greatly appreciate that. You do get some cool merch if you are a Shamrock, blue, or gold member. So there's some of those gold, Shamrock, blue members in the chat, and they can tell you about that. But it's definitely being a part of that community is I think something you should want to be a part of. But it's also a great way to support Irish Breakdown. So you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Final part of today's show, we're going to talk a little recruiting. And Notre Dame had a huge weekend that I thought Sean and Ryan did a great job of breaking down yesterday. Ryan did an awesome job of getting intel and scoop. And normally how weekends like this go is I'll get a lot of intel, Ryan will get intel, and we'll put it together, and Ryan will publish it. And it's our intel, but Ryan publishes it. This weekend, I offered very little. I didn't give a whole lot of intel because Ryan had it all. He did a great job this weekend getting intel, and of course, they broke down. That was on the message board, so if you were a message board subscriber, you saw all the different intel that Ryan had. Great vibes coming out of the weekend. That's just step one, though. There's two more huge recruiting events coming up. One is this weekend. Guys like Derek Meadows, Tanook Hines are going to be on campus this weekend. But there's a big event. There's a big recruiting official period from today until Thursday that has three other players on it that's very, very important. Notre Dame has got to hit a home run. Really, I mean, Notre Dame's 2025 class is ultimately going to come down to how well they can make moves beginning with last Friday to this upcoming Sunday. You had that first group showed up on Friday. Then you have this group is now showing up today. They'll leave Thursday. The final group comes up on Friday. Then they leave Sunday. That Friday to Sunday, so it'd be what, 9 days, 10 days, is going to make or break this class from the standpoint of, is it going to be a good top 10 class, or can it be a legit top 5 class on our board and even national boards? That's the kind of talent Notre Dame has on campus right now. In the next 3 days, huge, absolutely huge. So let's talk about those three players. What's at stake here for Notre Dame? I know Ryan previewed the upcoming visits. I'm going to give you my thoughts on these three players, and then we're going to watch a little film on two of them. So the first player we're going to talk about who we're not going to watch film on, because we've watched a lot of film of him already. We had an entire film session broken down to him. That's Jadon Blair, who is a 6'4", 180-pound safety from the state of North Carolina. He has been a must-get target for Notre Dame for a long time. And with the latest going on with Ivan Taylor and the uncertainty about him staying in the class, and if you were to ask me my opinion right now, I don't think Ivan Taylor stays in the class. But I don't want to say that definitively because he's going to be on campus this weekend. And if the Notre Dame staff can solidify things and he comes out of the weekend recommitted to Notre Dame, doesn't take any more visits, then we'll be good. If he doesn't recommit to Notre Dame this weekend and goes on more visits, then I will be very I'll just say this. I will have reservations about him rejoining the class because I'm treating him like an uncommitted player now because that's the Notre Dame rule. They're going to have to get him to recommit this weekend. If he doesn't, I don't feel great about it. If he does, then I think it's good. That doesn't have any impact on Jadon Blair. Jadon Blair is the guy that they have wanted for a long time, a guy that the staff has been in love with for a long time. That only increased when Mike Mickens took over as the secondary coach. Mike Mickens, from what I'm told, absolutely loves Jadon Blair. I've been told Chad Bowden loves Jadon Blair. Marcus Freeman loves Jadon Blair. Everybody's on board. Al Golden, they all love Jadon Blair. Impact potential player. We've talked about this before, even before the stuff with Ivan Taylor. Ryan and I have both said on our show that if Jadon Blair signs to Notre Dame, he would be our highest ranked safety. Not by a ton, because Ivan Taylor is very good, but he would be our number one ranked safety. He is a top 50 player on both of our boards. So he's an impact player. His ranking is too low, in my opinion. On3 has him highest at 85. The others have him much lower. I don't know what the holdup is. I think a lot of it comes in. I don't think it's bias. I think a lot of it comes down to, and John Garcia and I talked about this on the show when we had John on. He's a unicorn athlete. And I don't use that term a whole lot, and I don't use it for talented guys. For me, a unicorn is a guy that's just he's not like what you normally see. And Jadon Blair at 6'4" is not what you normally see from a safety. Usually guys that are 6'4" that play safety end up moving down to rover or linebacker. But with Jadon, I see a guy that can stay at safety. Well, Notre Dame had a guy like that recently in Kyle Hamilton. And from every conversation I've ever had with all my sources, there's not conversation about moving him down to linebacker. They view him as a safety, and they view him as a Kyle Hamilton type of safety. And I don't know that Jadon has the frame to grow into a linebacker either. And so I think that's part of the reason that you haven't heard it. But he's an absolute must-get impact player. You land Jadon, and you've got an elite secondary class. If you land Jadon and Ivan Taylor, and you keep Ivan Taylor in the class, or I'd say get to Ivan Taylor back in the class, you've got a potential generational secondary class. I believe it's that good. And Jadon Blair is a big part of it. So they're going to have to impress him this weekend. He does have a couple more visits coming up, so you're going to have to kind of battle through that. But we love where Notre Dame is with Jadon Blair. They're in great position. As long as they don't screw it up, I feel great about it. And so Jadon is now on campus right now. He arrived last night, and he arrived in town. The visit didn't start till today. Being arrived in town last night. Most kids do arrive the night before the official starts, and he'll be staying through Sunday. So very, very big 3-day period for him and for the Notre Dame defense. Like if they're able to add Jadon and the 2 linebackers from this past weekend, I mean, this is a phenomenal defensive class. I mean, just a phenomenal defensive class. There's 2 other kids on campus this weekend, and we're getting our first offensive players on campus that are uncommitted. So there have been some offensive players on campus, but those are commits. You get 2 players that are going to be on campus this weekend who are uncommitted, and it's 2 wide receivers. One young man by the name of John Anthony Hall. I know Ryan has talked about him on the show. He's from Fishers High School in Indiana. He is ranked as a top 100 player by one service, top 300 by another, and then the other side is a 3-star. I think he's in between those 2 rankings. I think he's not a top 50 guy, but he's also not as low as 300. He's a good football player, and we'll break down his film in a minute. Notre Dame obviously offered him recently. He's about 6'1", 175, 180. Very productive player, had over 1,000 yards last year, plays good competition. He's a good football player and a player that Notre Dame is now seems to be making a push for. Going to try some more digging on that one. And then the other young man is a player from Laverne High School, or Laverne, California, Bonita High School. That is Dylan Robinson, who is a 6'2", 290-pound player. He is a top 200 player by 2 services, a 4-star player by another. ESPN apparently hasn't had the time to rank him yet. But the other 3 all have him as a 4-star player. I actually like him a lot. I think he's a top 150 caliber kid on the IB board. There are some things I want to see from him as a senior that if I see from them with where his grade is now, I think he jumps up to a top 100 guy on my board. If he can improve, route running still needs work, just being more consistent at the catch point. There's just a couple things I want to see from him, but he's not that far away from being a top 100 player on my board. And he's a guy that's a very good defensive player as well. But I like him as a receiver, as does Notre Dame. He's coming in town, feeling very good about Notre Dame. Now it's about, okay, this is his chance to really impress him. And you get these 2 kids on campus, you've got to impress both of them. Look, I'll just say it like this. Like, we've got Tanook Hines is coming soon. You've got Derek Meadows coming soon. I definitely want Tanook Hines in this class. And I'd take 3 more guys. I would, especially now that you don't have Sean Terry in the class, I'd take 3 more receivers. So if John Anthony Hall wanted to come, I'd take him. If Dylan Robinson wanted to come, I'd take him. And then if Tanook Hines wants to come, I'd take him too. I'd take Derek Meadows as well in place of any of those 3 guys if he wanted to come, meaning I would take him as one of the 3 also. I'm basically going to take the first 3 from this group of 4 that want to commit. It's going to be tough to do, but that's what they're going to try to do. I think the biggest must get is Tanook Hines because of his speed. He's the guy that you have to get because you need to add that speed in this class. There's a lot of good route runners and good pass catchers and skill and those type of things in this class. If you get 2 of those other 3, if you get Hall and Robinson, those are good football players, but they're in a similar style as Elijah Burris. Good route runners, good hands, good speed, but not great speed. I think that Tunuk Hines brings home run speed. So he would be the one guy that would bring that unique skill set that you need. These other two kids are good football players, and I would take them. And we're going to dive into film, and you guys are going to get a chance to see why. But Notre Dame's got to they've got to make their case with these two kids this week. And the fact that Notre Dame's got such a small board right now is going to allow them to have these kids on campus and spend a lot of attention on just these three kids. So you're going to see Mike Brown and Mike Denbrock and Gino Gaduli and Chad Bowden and Marcus Freeman spending a lot of time with these two wide receivers. And it's closing time. It's closing time. And we're going to have to see if they can do that. So we're going to dive into some film next. We're going to start off with John Anthony Hall, and we're going to break down his film. So we're going to bring his film up now, and we're going to have some fun diving into what he's got, what kind of game he's got. Again, this is a young man that's got good size. He's more quick and smooth than he is fast. You can even see that in this particular play. That's good speed. That's not burner speed. Just more of a blown coverage than anything. He's a really savvy player, very smooth athlete, very good hands. Not an explosive guy, but a very smooth guy. Gets out of breaks well. The funny thing is, I didn't love his film at first, and I'm curious if you guys have a similar impression. Like usually players put their best film at the beginning, and I did not think that John Anthony Hall did that. His best film comes later. But it's good early film. You can see it there. This is an example of a kid that's a good route runner. Gets inside, gets up on the safety because he's not influencing the corner here. He's worried about that safety there. Gets on that safety, influences him, finds that soft spot, levels it off, attacks the football. Watch how he comes back to the football. That safety thinks he's about to make a play. He jumps in front of that guy. Look at that. He thinks he's about to have a pick. John Anthony Hall sees that, jumps in front, picks it off. That's a kid with a very high football IQ. Very smart football player. And you see a lot of that from him. Again, good pass catcher, knows how to find those soft spots. And there's value in that. Nice feet, nice quick feet, tough in traffic. Of course, you don't see a lot of receivers wearing number 81, but of course, Notre Dame fans probably at least older guys, right? They're probably like that. So we'll kind of see how they view or how they do. So here's another play right here. Again, I really like this top end. Gets the guy, stacks the guy, beats him off the line, leans him inside, gets great separation on the outcut. Ball comes late. He makes a dive for it, but overall, he was doing a pretty good job there and did a nice job getting separation. Here's another one, working from the slot, gets upside. So he takes a little bit too far of an inside release to get clear here. But what I like is he widens back out and then sticks it at the top. And, because the reason he widens, he wants to influence the safety. If he just stays vertical, that safety is going to close down on him and then could potentially make a play on it. By leaning it out, though, see, look, that safety is getting ready to squeeze, right? See that safety up top? He's getting ready to squeeze, and then as soon as John Anthony leans him back out, that guy kind of slows down and stutters. Now he's beat. Now he can't get over there. That's a smart, savvy play, very smart. Very good route by John Anthony Hall. Nice, real quick 1-2 at the top. It's a good play there. I mean, I just think you need guys like this on your football team. You need guys to know how to win. You need guys to know how to get open. That's really where you're at. It's a tough play. He's not the biggest kid. This is a really nice grab. Knowing traffic, know he's in traffic, knowing a hit may come. Does a nice job again. Look at him. Watch how gets inside. A little bit more of a bend release than I like. But I love how he widens the guy back out. Look at that safety. That safety's flat foot and thinking, this guy's in front, this guy's inside of me. I'm good. I'm going to close down on his route. But when he widens that guy back out, the safety now leaves and he creates a separation. But what he also does is, if he doesn't bend that back out and he just stays on a vertical plane there and brings that post route inside, he's getting stuck by that safety. That safety is going to, because now he's right where the safety is when the ball comes. So I really like the technique, really like what he brings to the table. Kid's got some skill. Not an elite athlete, right? That's the thing you guys are saying. He's not an elite athlete. He's a solid athlete. Smooth. He's fluid. He's got some ability. He can get it in and out of breaks pretty quickly, but he's not a real explosive athlete. So I can understand why some may not like him as much as others. You know, he reminds me a lot of, and I said this to a buddy the other day. He's a guy that I think was a very good football player and had great production. Reminds me a lot of David Bell. You know, David Bell's another guy that wasn't a great athlete. He wasn't super explosive. That's why he got drafted so low. But he was smooth, similar size. David Bell wasn't a real big guy either. Similar smooth, but great hands, great body control, and just knew how to get open. Just knew how to find soft spots, knew how to win with his top ends. Like what you see from John Anthony Hall is a kid that understands leverage. You have a kid that understands, properly manipulating secondary players. He understands how to create spacing on the football field to get open. He doesn't just, okay, I'm running around 12 yards to the post at a 45-degree. He understands this guy's here. I got to do this to manipulate him. I've got to do this to create separation. I've got to do this in order to be able to go out and say, hey, listen, I've got to get to this spot. How can I get to that spot without go too soon, too late? How do I get to that spot without the defender closing on me? How can I manipulate this guy? How can I gain separation? If you're not going to be a great athlete, you better know how to create separation. And when you watch this young man play, that's exactly what he does. He knows how to create separation. He knows how to use his technique and his route running ability and his body to create space between him and the defender, to position himself between the defender and the football. There's need for that. Again, not every guy is meant to be an elite 4-4 player. I brought up David Bell. Where was David Bell drafted? He was not drafted very high. I'm actually going to go look that up right now and see where he was drafted, but he wasn't a super high draft pick. I don't know that he's done anything in the NFL. Let's see here. He was a third-round draft pick. Okay. Hasn't done a whole lot in the NFL so far. Has 24 catches as a rookie, 14 last year. He's averaging only 10 yards a catch. He's not doing a whole lot in the NFL. Actually, I'm surprised he did get drafted. I ran like a 4.6, I believe, at the combine. Not a real explosive athlete, not a real big guy. Just knew how to get open. Just knew how to make plays, knew how to use his body. And that's what I see from John Anthony Hall. So when I first saw John Anthony Hall, full disclosure, I wasn't blown away by him. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, what the heck was the Notre Dame staff thinking not taking that kid? But then you watch game film and you watch his highlights more and you dive into his bigger games and you say, like, boy, this kid just knows how to play. This kid just knows how to get open. Like, yeah, he's not the greatest athlete. He's not the biggest guy. He's like 6'1", 180, but this kid knows how to get open. It's a good football player. And I've come around on him. And some guys are like that. Some guys are just going to be, they grow on you kind of guys. And that is what Jonathan Hall does for me. And, some comps I feel are forced, but, I got to come up with one because people ask for them. The David Bell comp for John Anthony Hall was about as easy as I could find. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And that's the kind of player that you're going to be getting. Whoever gets him is going to be getting is that kind of guy. And it's a good football player. Let's talk about Dylan Robinson next. This is a young man from California. You're going to see some offensive and defensive film from him. Again, another player whose game I like. He's not a burner, but I do think he brings some big playability to the table. But the one thing you're going to see, he's listed at 6'2". He is a long athlete. He's got a very nice catch radius. He's a guy that needs some refinement as a route runner. That's going to be a big thing. He's a guy that I want to see attack the football just a little bit more, but he's a kid that and he's got to get stronger. But he's got a lot of ability. Smooth, fluid. I think he's a long strider. I think he covers a lot more ground than you think because of those long strides. He's a kid that knows how to make plays. Not elite production. Knows a two-way player in high school, but he's got a chance to be a really good football player. Look, I like that burst. Really nice get off. A little bit more false step than I'd like to see, but he still gets off the line pretty well. Eats up that cushion pretty quickly. You see him gain separation. Really good focus when the ball's in the air. That's something I love about this kid. Now, that player he just beat's not very good. But you see this kid has really good body control, does a great job of focusing on the football, and fights for the ball. As he gets stronger, he'll be even more effective. I think he'll also get a little bit faster. But he's a pretty good athlete already. And covers ground pretty well. But I love the catch radius. I love the focus on the football. I love how he attacks the football. He catches the ball with his hands. He's a good football player. And a guy that I think has boundary ability. And that's something that Notre Dame needs in this class is they need a guy that can be a boundary guy. They don't really have anybody else. I don't even know that Derek Meadows is definitely a boundary guy, at least not right now because he's so skinny. I think he'll eventually become that kind of guy. But this is a kind of kid that I see as being a boundary type of guy. Look at that, coming back for the football. Ball's underthrown. Does a nice job. Tax leverage, right? Corner's playing inside. Why is he doing that? Because what's the one place the corner doesn't want him to go? The corner doesn't want him to go inside. So if he just releases vertical here, the corner's just going to come with him and ride him outside. And the next thing you know, Dylan Robinson's catching his ball near the sideline. But because he stems him the way that he does, and I'd actually like to see Dylan stay a little bit more vertical, but he's got that safety inside to worry about. But because he stems a guy like that, he gives himself a lot more room to the sideline. A better ball, and it's a catch and run situation. And that's obviously something that you want to see from the quarterback is lead him, obviously. But that's a really nice route from Dylan Robinson. Here's him playing defense, plays corner. First high school. It's the same high school as Noah McHale. Okay, so really pretty relatively clean transition there. That one I love. So okay transition at the line, but when he gets up to the top end of this route, and you see that look back, how quickly he looks back and finds the ball, keeps his hands on the receiver, and then just gets his head around real quick and makes that play. That was I really like seeing that. Really like seeing that. Right. Really, for a longer guy, pretty clean transitions here, right? Not a guy that I'd want playing corner, but a guy that could definitely play safety. See him attack the ball. He gets upfield quickly. And he's pretty decent after the catch, too. You see that on offense and defense. But he's just a really good football player. He really is. I like this play, too. Nice closing speed, good form tackle. Again, really like this young man. He's got a lot of ability. A lot of ability. He's a borderline. He's a top 125, 30 guy for me right now. In my grading system, it's 150. It's 25, 50, 100, 150, 250. He grades out as a top 150 guy. If I can see a little bit more juice from him this year, a little bit more route technique, just catch the ball a little bit more consistently, he's going to jump up. But I like this play too. Again, smart play. Good job making a play on the ball. No, and Jason Smith, I do not think he's faster than Cam. Cam Hart's pretty fast. Cam Hart's 4.5 flat 40 time was considered disappointing by those who know how he ran at Notre Dame. Here he is here again. Smooth route, smooth get off, nice catch of the ball, finds an open spot, gets it yards after the catch. This is Dylan Robinson, for those who are asking. This is Dylan Robinson from Bonita High School, who's visiting this next couple days. Really nice stop and drive here on this little comeback route here by the receiver. Really nice stop and drive. Plant makes it to where the receiver has no chance to get to the football. Very, very well done. Here's a receiver. Again, I want to see he gets a nice vertical release. I want to see him lean that guy and stick that route. And you see him do that a couple times. He doesn't really stick that top end on those corner routes, and that's something that I want to see more. It doesn't have to be overdone, but you just need a little snap, a little bit more snap on that particular play. If he does that, I think it'll be more impactful. I hate when guys put their hand up like that. Like, guy, the quarterback's going to see or he isn't. You putting your hand up is not going to help you. Sorry, pet peeve of mine as a quarterback and as a receivers coach. But you can see, again, he doesn't look like he's a burner, but he covers a lot of ground in a hurry because of those long strides. Just want to see him be a little bit more snappy with his top ends. That's like you saw that with John Anthony Hall. You see that with Elijah Burris. I want to see him, especially like if he is a boundary guy, he's going to have comebacks. He's going to have some burst corners. He's going to have some out cuts where he's going to need to be just a little bit more snappy. He's going to have some dig cuts and some in cuts, some glance routes where he's just going to need to be some more snappy to create that separation, that initial separation out of the break. He doesn't really create a lot of that separation. Love the tracking of the ball, but he doesn't create a lot of that separation right now because he just kind of leans into the route. I've shown, on the board in the past on times where, you see that from Chase Claypool, who was fast, where he'd let guys slower than him cover him because he wouldn't break off routes. He wouldn't show that snappiness. I like this catch here. Again, you see good body control, good strong hands, attacks the ball well, gets extra yards, starts getting lined up. This is something you can see too. This is a 2-minute situation. Gets the ball down, right? Gets tackled, puts it down. Okay, look at where are we going to go? We got to get lined up. Not celebrating, not giving the first down mark, although probably shouldn't have because they didn't get it. Nothing like that. Just, okay, let's get up. Let's go play. It's good situational awareness. It's not a physical tackler, but he's a good tackler, which I like. Good form tackler, takes on blocks relatively well, which you see on that particular clip. He's not a defensive guy, in my opinion. I think he's definitely a wide receiver. He's a really good high school defensive player, but he's not a guy that I think projects to that position the next level. Could maybe be a safety. I think he's an offense. I think he's most instinctive. He's good on defense because he's tough and he's athletic and he's big. He's long. His natural ability is more as a receiver, in my opinion. And that's why I'm glad that Notre Dame's recruiting him at that position, because I think that's where his game fits best. Look at that awareness, picking up those 2 routes, right? Sees the wheel, nice transition. He's all over it. Very well done. Very well done. It's him in the slot on defense. Beats the guy field. Good. Look, I mean, that's a 6'2" guy going low. I like that. I definitely like that. Good form tackler. That's not a very big back there. So he knows he's got to get low, does a good job, makes the tackle. It's a good, tough football player. I don't know how many of you have seen him before, but look, he's smooth. Like, watch this. Watch his feet here. Very smooth, very clean, nice, easy transition, finds the football just all over that receiver. It's a very good play right there. He's a very good athlete, very good football player. Right? This is okay. This is against zone. He doesn't need to be super snappy here. I'm fine with this. Just get around, find that soft spot, get the ball. Does a good job there. It's a nice play. It's a good play. Because that's the thing. I was working with a kid yesterday on route running, and we were going over, sharp top ends. And I said, look, there's a time and a place where this matters. There's a time and a place where it's just turn into your spot and get open. If you're running a hitch route versus a cover 3 bail corner, you don't need to worry about, selling the top end. You just need to get to your depth and snap them feet down and give the quarterback your numbers and be ready to catch the ball. Sometimes there's a time and a place for when you need to be snapping, a time and a place when you don't need to be. That's a time where I'd like to see him be a little bit snappier. Better corners are going to have an easier time covering him on that type of route. Just a little bit snappier on the top end of that route. Something I'd like to see from him. Love the length. Really love the length. Watch a few more of these clips here, and then we will wrap this show up. You can see he doesn't get the ball a ton in high school. They don't throw the ball a ton in high school. So I think that's something that's kind of tamped down what people see him as, is because he doesn't have the big time numbers that some other guys do. So that is going to do it for today's show, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed that film breakdown. As I said, this is a big week for Notre Dame recruiting. This past weekend was huge. This upcoming weekend is huge, and these next 3 days are huge. If the wide receiver position is going to be what it needs to be, they need to at least get one of these 2 players. I'd take both. I would take both of them. I'm okay taking 5 guys in this class, especially since I don't know that one of the 5 is going to stick at receiver, or is a guy that I don't necessarily think is a guy that really can play at this level. I do think that a 5th is good if it's the right 5. And so, like, Brandon made a comment. I don't necessarily disagree with your comment, Brandon. In theory, if you don't view one of these, 2 of these 4 guys as difference makers, then I only want to take 4. My point is, if you view them the way it just comes down to how you view them. If you view them as guys that as a unit can be difference makers, then I say take them. So I actually am sympathetic to Brandon's comment, and I didn't agree with the way he was talked to on that. I actually understand where he's coming from on that. It just comes down to a difference in evaluation. I think with Dylan Robinson and Tanook Hines, they have very high ceilings. what I love about John Anthony Hall is I actually think he has a very high floor. And I would argue that he may have the highest floor of all the receivers. If you get him, Tanook Hines, Dylan Robinson, Elijah Burris, and Jerome Bettis Jr., I would argue that John Anthony Hall might have the highest floor of all of them. And you're getting different styles. He's more of a volume guy. Dylan Robinson is more of a stretch the field kind of guy. Tanook Hines is a burner, and Dylan is a boundary guy. Tanook is a field guy. John Anthony Hall can kind of play all over, to be honest with you. Jerome Bettis is more of a boundary guy. Elijah Burris is more of a field guy that could maybe play some slot. You got different skill sets, different types, different strengths as players. And it's kind of like you don't have any stars, but the sum of the whole thing is better than maybe the individual parts might be. There's no like 5-star guy. There's no Cam Williams. There's no Chase Claypool. There's no Michael Floyd. There's just a lot of good football players in this group. Then you've got a star last year maybe in Cam Williams. Then you can focus on maybe a smaller class last year, because my thing is get the depth in this class, the different skill sets in this class, and then maybe next year you have a smaller group of receivers. Maybe you only need to bring 2, maybe 3, depending on how your roster goes, and then you can have a smaller board and focus on the elite impact players more. So I actually would load up a little bit. I think the receiver position is going to need a little bit of a turnover in the next couple of years, because you're going to lose a lot. In the next 2 years, you're going to lose Jaden Thomas, Deion Colsey, Chris Mitchell, Jaden Harrison, and Bo Collins. 5 guys. And if Jaden Greathouse is as good as we think he's going to be, he may be gone by the time this class goes into their sophomore years. You never know. And then, of course, there's always the potential for departures and injuries and things like that. So I'm actually okay getting to 5 in this class. And I also think there's some players that have some positional flexibility in that group as well. So that's kind of how I feel about it. So that's where I'm at on the receiver room. I think there's some ability in this group, and we've got to see if they can close. That's the key, right? Like, hey, if they get this guy, I don't know that they're going to get any of those guys. That's the problem. I think they're in a good place with John Anthony Hall. If they push and do it right, I think they can get him. Dylan Robinson, we'll see. I think I like where Notre Dame is at, but you got to close. Tanook Hines, you got to close. Texas, some other schools are coming hard. You got to close. I think they get at least one of them. I do. I think they get at least one of the guys that are one of the 4 receivers visiting. I think they'll get at least one of them, and maybe soon. I don't know that. I'm not leaking any information. I just think that where things stand, I can see them, blowing a kid away and a kid making a decision soon, whether it goes public or not. I could see them getting up to 3 of them, and then obviously somewhere in between. It just depends on how this next week goes. That's the key. Especially with the out-of-state kids. You've got to really blow them away over this next week, and we'll see if they can do it. So tonight, IB Nation Sports Talk is going to go live here in about 25 minutes. Tomorrow, I'm going to be back for our midweek rundown. We're going to have buy, sell, or hold. So if you are a member of the Irish Breakdown Premium Board at Champions Lounge, you can go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. Salty already put the post up this morning to get your buy, sell, hold questions in there. So we're going to have a lot more to talk about tomorrow, starting at 2 o'clock. And we'll have a couple Notre Dame topics, and then we will dive into the buy, sell, or hold. So you'll see that on Wednesday. And then, of course, we'll have another show on Thursday. Friday mailbag, 1 o'clock on Friday. So 2 o'clock on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 1 o'clock Monday and Friday. I may change that soon. Just depends on a couple things that we have in the works that we'll see. We'll see how those type of things play out, but you never know. So there's a shot we're going to move it up and just kind of have all the shows start at 1. We'll kind of see how that all goes. So anyway, have an awesome rest of your day, everybody. I appreciate y'all joining me and enjoyed this conversation, and hope you guys enjoyed the show. Tell your friends about it. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And as I've said a bunch of times, would love to see you guys sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I'll talk to y'all again here very soon. Have a great rest of your day, and come back and join us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.